Hello, my dear friend. Welcome back to another gentle journey through time. Tonight, we're going to drift together into the mists of 11th century England, where the world moves at the pace of seasons, and life unfolds like a quiet stream winding through ancient valleys. Picture yourself settling in beside a warm hearth, as I tell you about ordinary folk living extraordinary lives amidst a world that's slowly, quietly changing. We'll walk through villages where wood smoke curls from thatched roofs, where the ring of a blacksmith's hammer echoes across misty fields, and where people tend their gardens and animals much as their ancestors did for countless generations before them. Tonight's story isn't about grand battles or thundering armies, though they cast their shadows across our tale. Instead, we'll experience history through the eyes of villagers, farmers, and craftspeople who watched their world transform one gentle day at a time. If you're finding comfort in this peaceful journey through time, perhaps you'd like to leave a gentle like or subscribe to join our growing community of nighttime wanderers. And I'd truly love to know where you're listening from tonight. Are you tucked into bed in a busy city, or perhaps in a quiet countryside that might not be so different from the England we're about to visit? It always amazes me how our voices can travel across oceans and centuries, connecting us in these quiet moments before sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're drifting off from tonight. There's something magical about knowing we're all sharing this peaceful moment together, scattered across the globe, but united in this gentle exploration of the past. Now, let's help your body find that perfect state of rest. Adjust your pillow just so. Perhaps pull that blanket a little closer around your shoulders. Feel how it wraps around you like a soft cocoon, protective and warm. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Hold it for just a moment, and let it out slowly, as if you're releasing all the weight of the day. Again, breathe in the quiet of this moment, and breathe out any lingering thoughts or worries. Feel your body beginning to melt into your bed, as if you're sinking gently into soft, sun-warmed earth. Your shoulders can drop and soften. Your jaw can unclench. Even your eyelids are growing pleasantly heavy, like curtains slowly drawing closed at the end of a long, peaceful day. As your breathing grows deeper and more rhythmic, imagine that you're drifting not just into sleep, but backward through time itself. The years peel away like pages turning in an ancient book. 2025, 2000, 1900, 1800. Further and further back, until the very air around you begins to change. You blink your eyes open, not your real eyes, but the eyes of your imagination, and find yourself lying on a simple straw mattress. The rough wool of a coarse blanket scratches gently against your skin, but it's warm and comforting. Through the gaps in the wooden walls around you, you can see thin streams of pale morning light, and you can hear the soft lowing of cattle in a nearby field. The air smells different here, cleaner somehow, touched with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and something green and growing. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, its call echoing across fields that stretch to a horizon unmarked by any modern intrusion. A church bell tolls once, twice, its bronze voice carrying across the village like a gentle reminder that time moves differently in this place. You can hear the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the creak of a wooden cartwheel, and voices. Human voices speaking in accents that would sound strange to modern ears, yet somehow familiar and warm. You've awakened in England, in the late months of the year 1066. It's a time when a single October day changed the course of a kingdom forever, when Harold Godwin's son fell at Hastings and William of Normandy claimed a crown. But here, in this small village nestled in the rolling countryside, that distant battle feels like something from another world entirely. You are a villager. Perhaps you tend a small plot of land, or help in your family's cottage, or work with your hands at some honest trade. Your life moves with the rhythm of seasons and the cycle of sun and moon. You know every face in your village, every path through the surrounding fields, every stone in the old church where your grandparents were married and where they now lie at rest. But whispers are beginning to reach even your quiet corner of the world. Whispers of a new king, of strange soldiers speaking a foreign tongue, of changes coming like autumn mist, slowly, quietly, but inevitably. Tonight, we'll experience those changes not through the eyes of kings and nobles, but through yours, through the eyes of someone for whom history isn't made of grand gestures, but of small, daily adaptations to a world that's shifting like sand beneath your feet. So settle back now, let your breathing slow and deepen, and prepare to witness how the great wheel of history turns. Not with thunder and lightning, but with the gentle persistence of water wearing away stone, one quiet day at a time. As your mind drifts deeper into this distant time, Let me paint for you the world you've awakened into, a world that would seem both utterly foreign and surprisingly familiar to our modern eyes. This is England in the year of our Lord 1066, a land that has just witnessed one of history's great turning points, though most of its people don't yet realize it. Earlier this year, on a cold January morning, King Edward the Confessor drew his last breath, leaving behind no heir and a kingdom poised on the edge of uncertainty. 3 men claimed his throne: Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex; Harold Hardrada, the fierce King of Norway; and William, Duke of Normandy, who insisted that Edward had promised him the crown years before. By October, the question was settled in blood on a field near Hastings, where Norman cavalry charged Saxon shields and arrows fell like deadly rain. When the sun set on that autumn day, Harold lay dead with an arrow through his eye, and William the Conqueror stood as England's new king. But here in your village, nestled in the countryside where ancient Roman roads have long since crumbled into grassy tracks, these grand events feel distant as thunder from a far-off storm. Your England is still a land of scattered settlements connected by muddy paths, where news travels at the speed of a walking horse and life revolves around the ancient rhythms that have governed your people since time immemorial. Picture the world around you. Thatched cottages huddle together like sleeping animals, their walls made of timber and clay, their windows mere holes covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Smoke rises from cooking fires where women tend iron pots suspended over glowing coals. The air carries the sound of children playing with sticks and stones, of pigs rooting in the dirt, of spinning wheels turning flax into thread. Your village church, built of gray stone by Saxon hands generations ago, stands at the heart of your community like an anchor in time. Its bell marks the hours of prayer, its yard holds the bones of your ancestors, and its walls have witnessed countless baptisms, weddings, and funeral masses. The priest who tends this flock speaks of God's will and the eternal nature of the soul, but he also knows which herbs cure a fever and when to plant barley for the best harvest. This is a world measured not in minutes and seconds, but in seasons and lifetimes. A world where everyone knows their place: the lord in his hall, the peasant in his field, the monk in his cell. A world where change comes slowly, like the wearing away of stone steps by countless feet, so gradual as to be nearly invisible from day to day. Yet change is coming nonetheless, carried on Norman ships and Norman horses, speaking Norman French and imposing Norman law. But like all great transformations, it will unfold not in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small adjustments, 1,000 quiet adaptations, as England slowly becomes something new while remaining, in its deepest heart, eternally itself. Now let us step together into this world and see how history feels when experienced not from the throne room, but from the cottage door. The autumn leaves drift lazily to the ground as you sit by the village well, your wooden bucket resting beside you on the worn stone rim. The air carries that particular crispness that speaks of winter's approach, not harsh yet, but promising. You can smell the sweet scent of apples ripening in the orchards beyond the cottages, mixed with the comforting aroma of bread baking in someone's clay oven. It's that peaceful time of afternoon when the day's heaviest work is done, but evening chores haven't yet begun. The sun filters through the yellowing leaves of the great oak that has stood sentinel over your village well for longer than anyone can remember. Some say it was here when the Romans walked these paths, though that seems like a story from another world entirely. You dip your fingers into the cool water, watching the ripples spread outward in perfect circles. There's something hypnotic about water, isn't there? The way it moves, always seeking its own level, always finding a way forward. You don't need to think about these things deeply. Just let them wash over you like the gentle breeze that stirs the fallen leaves at your feet. The sound of hoofbeats on the dirt path draws your attention, but slowly, without urgency. In your village, strangers are rare but not unwelcome. The rider who approaches is clearly a traveler. His clothes are dusty from the road, and his horse looks tired but well cared for. He dismounts near the well, and you can see he's a merchant of some kind, his saddlebags bulging with goods. "Good afternoon, friend," he says, his voice carrying an accent from somewhere to the south. "Might I water my horse and rest a moment?" "Of course," you reply, gesturing to the well. The water runs clean and cold. As he tends to his horse, drawing water in the leather bucket he carries, you notice other villagers beginning to gather. Word spreads quickly in a small community, not through any urgent calling, but in the way that news naturally flows, like water finding its course. Old Willem emerges from his cottage, leaning heavily on his walking stick. Young Mary appears from behind the baker's shop, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Even the children pause in their games to listen. The traveler seems to understand that he's become the afternoon's entertainment, and he doesn't seem to mind. After his horse has drunk its fill, he settles himself on a tree stump that serves as the village's informal storytelling seat. "I've come from London," he begins, and immediately the small crowd leans in a little closer. "London might as well be the end of the world for most of your neighbors, a place of kings and bishops and wonders beyond imagining. There's news," he continues, his voice taking on that particular cadence that storytellers use, neither hurried nor overly dramatic. "Great news that will reach every corner of England before the winter's done. You find yourself settling more comfortably against the well's stone rim, your work temporarily forgotten. The traveler's words don't demand urgent attention. They flow like a gentle stream, carrying information the way streams carry leaves. King Harold is dead," the merchant says simply. "Fell at Hastings, they say, with an arrow through his eye. William of Normandy has taken the crown." The words hang in the autumn air like morning mist. Around you, faces register the information in different ways. Old Willem nods slowly, as if he's been expecting such news. Mary's hand goes to her throat in surprise. The children don't fully understand, but they sense the gravity in the adult's sudden stillness. You let the information settle in your mind without grasping at it too tightly. Kings die, new kings take their place. This has been the way of things since time began. Your grandfather once told you about the Danish kings, and before them others whose names are now forgotten. The crown changes hands, but the seasons still turn, the crops still need tending, and babies are still born while old folks pass peacefully in their sleep. "What does it mean for folk like us?" asks Willem, his voice carrying the weight of many years and much wisdom. The merchant shrugs, not dismissively, but with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who's seen many changes. "Hard to say yet. William's been crowned at Westminster, they tell me. Says he's the rightful king, that Edward promised him the throne years ago. The great lords are bending the knee, some willingly, others." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "Others are still deciding. Will there be more fighting?" Mary asks, her voice soft with concern. "Perhaps, but not here, not in places like this." The merchant gestures around at your peaceful village. "Great lords fight over castles and cities. Villages like yours. Well, you'll pay your taxes to whoever collects them, tend your fields regardless, and life will go on much as it always has." You find this answer oddly comforting. Change comes to kingdoms, but the deep rhythms of life, planting and harvest, birth and death, the daily round of work and rest, these continue like the flowing of rivers, ancient and constant. The traveler reaches into one of his pouches and pulls out a piece of bread and some cheese, offering to share with anyone who might be hungry. It's the kind of gesture that makes you remember that despite all the grand talk of kings and battles, the world still turns on small kindnesses, on the offer of food to a stranger or water to a thirsty horse. As he eats, the merchant tells you more about this new king, William the Conqueror, as people are already calling him. He's a duke from across the sea in Normandy, where they speak French and build their castles from stone. He's said to be a devout man, a strong warrior, and someone who keeps good order in his lands. They say he means to make England as orderly as Normandy, the traveler continues. New laws, new ways of doing things. But slowly, I'd expect. Even a king can't change everything at once. The afternoon light is beginning to slant lower through the oak leaves, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. You realize you've been sitting here for quite some time, but it doesn't feel rushed or urgent. This is how news was meant to be received. Not shouted from horseback or scrawled on hastily delivered messages, but shared peacefully among neighbors, digested slowly like a good meal. Young Thomas, the blacksmith's son, speaks up for the first time. "Will the new king come here? To our village?" The merchant chuckles, but not unkindly. "Kings don't often visit places like this, lad. They have great halls and important business to attend to. But his knights might pass through, and his tax collectors certainly will. You'll know of his rule even if you never see his face. Don't worry about remembering all these names and details. Let them float through your mind like clouds across the sky. What matters isn't the specific facts, but the feeling of this moment. The community gathered together, the slow absorption of news that will change the world, the comfort of familiar faces and familiar routines continuing despite the great upheavals happening far away." As the sun begins to sink lower, the merchant prepares to continue his journey. He has other villages to visit, other wells where he'll rest and share his news. The crowd begins to disperse naturally, people returning to their evening tasks. Cows to be milked, fires to be banked, children to be fed and settled for the night. You remain by the well a little longer, watching the last light play across the water's surface. The bucket beside you reminds you that you came here for water, and you finally lower it into the well's depths, hearing the gentle splash as it fills. As you walk back toward home, the bucket's weight comfortable in your hand, you can hear your neighbors talking quietly among themselves. The conversations aren't excited or fearful, just the steady murmur of people processing news, sharing thoughts, finding their way forward as communities always have. The stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky above, the same stars that shone down on Harold and William, on Saxon and Norman alike. They've watched kingdoms rise and fall for countless centuries, and they'll continue their patient vigil long after today's kings are dust and memory. As you reach your cottage door, you pause to look back at the village. Warm light glows from windows, smoke rises from chimneys, and somewhere a mother sings softly to her child. The great wheel of history has turned today, but life, real life, daily life, the life that truly matters, continues its ancient rhythm, steady as a heartbeat, constant as the stars above. The night is settling gently around your village like a soft blanket, and tomorrow will bring new tasks, new conversations, new moments of simple contentment. Change may be coming to England, but tonight, all is peaceful and well. The morning mist clings to the fields like a gentle embrace as you pause by the familiar hedgerow that borders the path to the mill. The world feels hushed and soft, wrapped in that particular quiet that comes just after dawn when the dew still jewels every blade of grass and the air tastes clean and new. You're carrying a small sack of grain, barley that needs grinding for your family's bread. It's a routine task, one you've done countless times before, walking this same path that winds through the countryside like a ribbon laid across the landscape by generations of feet. The weight of the grain is comfortable against your shoulder, and your breath forms small clouds in the cool air. The hedgerow beside you is thick with blackthorn and hazel, heavy with berries that the birds will feast on as autumn deepens. Somewhere in its tangled depths, a wren calls out its bright morning song, and you can hear the rustle of small creatures going about their daily business. This hedge has stood here longer than anyone can remember, marking the boundary between your village's common land and the Lord's fields beyond. As you walk, you let your mind drift peacefully, not thinking of anything in particular. Just aware of the soft crunch of leaves beneath your feet, the gentle warmth of the rising sun on your face, and the comforting rhythm of your own steady breathing. There's no hurry this morning. The miller won't even be stirring his fires for another hour, and you're content to move at the pace the morning sets for you. But then, cutting through the dawn stillness, comes a sound that makes you pause. Hoofbeats, not the single horse of yesterday's merchant, but multiple horses moving together with purpose. The sound grows louder, more distinct, and you realize they're approaching along the main road that runs past your village toward the market town. You step closer to the hedgerow, not from fear exactly, but from the natural caution that any sensible person feels when strangers approach. Through the mist and the gaps in the thorny branches, you catch your first glimpse of them. Riders, 4 of them, mounted on horses larger and finer than any you've seen before. Even in the dim morning light, you can make out the glint of metal, the way the early sun catches on mail shirts and helmet rims. These aren't merchants or messengers. These are soldiers. But what strikes you most isn't their weapons or their armor. It's how different they look from anyone you know. Their hair is cut shorter than Saxon men wear it, and they sit their horses with a particular kind of easy confidence that speaks of long familiarity with fighting from horseback. When they talk to each other, and you can just make out the murmur of their voices, the words sound strange, musical in a way that English isn't. Norman soldiers. The realization settles in your mind without panic, just as a name settles into place when you recognize a face. These must be some of William's men, the foreign warriors who fought at Hastings and now help him hold his new kingdom. The riders slow their pace as they approach your village, and you can see them looking about with the careful attention of men who are used to watching for trouble. But there's no aggression in their manner, more like the alertness of travelers in unfamiliar country, wanting to know what lies ahead. They turn their horses toward the village center, and you realize they're probably looking for the headman's house. In a community like yours, visitors with official business always seek out the most important person first. You follow at a distance, moving quietly along the hedgerow until you can see the main square where the well stands and most of the cottages cluster together. Already, word of the strangers has spread in that mysterious way that news travels in small places. Doors stand slightly ajar, and you can see faces peering out cautiously. Children have been called inside, but they press their faces to windows and peer around door frames with the irrepressible curiosity of the young. The lead rider, a man with graying hair and a scar along his left cheek, dismounts near the well with fluid grace. He hands his reins to one of his companions and looks around the square with what seems like genuine interest rather than suspicion. "Good morning," he calls out in accented but clear English. "We seek the headman of this village." After a moment, old Geoffrey emerges from his cottage. As the eldest landholder and the man who settles disputes, he's the closest thing your village has to a leader. He approaches the Normans with dignity, neither servile nor defiant, just one man meeting another with the respect due to a guest. "I am Geoffrey," he says simply. "You are welcome here." The Norman nods appreciatively at this courtesy. "I am Sir Aldrich, riding on King William's business. We require provisions for our journey, bread, ale, and fodder for our horses. We can pay." The transaction that follows is conducted with surprising politeness. Sir Aldrich doesn't demand or threaten. He negotiates like any traveler who needs supplies. Geoffrey calls for the baker and the brewer, and soon there's a small bustle of activity as bread is wrapped and ale is drawn from barrels. You watch from your position by the hedgerow, close enough to hear but far enough away to remain unnoticed. What strikes you most is how ordinary it all seems. These foreign soldiers, who fought in the great battle that changed England, are simply men who need food and drink, whose horses require hay and water. One of the younger Normans, barely more than a boy really, struggles with his horse's harness. Without being asked, young Tom the blacksmith's son steps forward and shows him how to adjust the strap properly. The Norman soldier nods his thanks, and for a moment, language barriers seem to disappear in the simple exchange of help offered and gratefully received. Don't worry about remembering their names or the details of what they need. Just let the scene wash over you like morning mist, gentle and natural, part of the slow rhythm of change that touches even the quietest corners of the world. While the provisions are being gathered, Sir Aldrich walks over to examine the village well. He runs his hand along the worn stone rim, much as you did yesterday, and nods approvingly at the clear water. "A good well," he says to Geoffrey. "The water runs clean. My grandfather's grandfather built it," Geoffrey replies with quiet pride. "The stone came from the old Roman road when it was broken up for building. Romans," Sir Aldrich muses. "They knew how to build things to last." He pauses, looking around the village with what seems like approval. "This is a peaceful place. Prosperous. Well-ordered. We are simple folk," Geoffrey says. "We tend our fields, care for our families, worship God, and harm no one." The Norman nods. King William values such places. Order. Peace. Good work done by honest people. He reaches into his pouch and pulls out a silver coin. More money than your village sees in a typical month. "For your hospitality." Geoffrey accepts the coin with dignity, though you can see the surprise in his eyes at the generosity. As the soldiers prepare to leave, Sir Aldrich addresses the small crowd that has gradually gathered. His voice carries easily in the still morning air, and his words, though accented, are clear and measured. "King William is your king now," he says, not as a threat but simply as a statement of fact. He asks only what any king asks: loyalty, obedience to his laws, and the taxes that support good governance. In return, he offers protection and justice. Those who live peacefully have nothing to fear. With that, the Normans mount their horses and continue on their way. The sound of hoofbeats gradually fades, absorbed by the mist that still clings to the fields. Your village settles back into its morning rhythm, but something has changed. Not dramatically, not frightfully, but definitively. You realize you're still holding your sack of grain, still bound for the mill. The ordinary business of life continues, but now it carries the weight of new understanding. The changes that yesterday seemed distant and abstract have taken on flesh and form. They have faces and voices and horses that need fodder. As you resume your walk to the mill, the mist begins to lift, revealing the familiar landscape in sharper detail. The fields stretch away in all directions, marked by the same hedgerows and stone walls that have defined this country for generations. But now you know that Norman soldiers ride these roads, that Saxon villages are learning to accommodate Norman needs, that the great transformation is happening not all at once, but in 1,000 small encounters like the one you've just witnessed. The mill will turn steadily when you arrive, its ancient rhythm unchanged by the morning's events. The miller greets you with the same nod he's given you for years, and soon the familiar sound of grinding grain fills the air. Some things, you realize with quiet satisfaction, remain constant despite all the changes swirling around them. The riders had vanished into the fog like morning spirits, and the village settled back into its gentle hum. But something had shifted, subtle as the turning of seasons, inevitable as the dawn. The heavy wooden door creaks as you step inside the village church, its ancient hinges singing their familiar song of welcome. The air is immediately different here, cooler, scented with centuries of burning candles and the faint sweetness of old incense that seems to have soaked into the very stones. Your footsteps echo softly on the worn flagstones as you move from the bright afternoon sunlight into the gentle dimness within. This church has stood at the heart of your village for longer than anyone can remember. Some say it was built when Alfred was king. Others claim it's even older than that. The walls are thick Saxon stone, fitted together by master craftsmen whose names are long forgotten, but whose skill speaks through every carefully placed block. The stones themselves seem to breathe with age and prayer, witnesses to countless baptisms, weddings, and funeral masses. You've come here seeking a few moments of quiet reflection after the morning's encounter with the Norman soldiers. Not from worry or fear, but from that natural human desire to find stillness in familiar surroundings when the world outside seems to be shifting like sand beneath your feet. The afternoon light filters through the small windows, casting patterns of gold and amber across the nave. These aren't the grand colored windows of the great cathedrals, just simple openings filled with oiled parchment that glows softly when the sun touches it. But there's something precious about this humble light, something that speaks of generations of your people gathering here in good times and difficult ones. At the front of the church, near the simple wooden altar, you can see the familiar figure of Father Godwin. He's kneeling in prayer, his gray head bowed, his lips moving silently in conversations with the Almighty that you can't hear, but somehow sense. He's been the priest of this parish for as long as you can remember, a gentle man who knows every soul in the village, who has blessed their babies and buried their grandparents, who can recite the seasons of planting and harvest as easily as he can the seasons of the church year. You settle yourself on one of the wooden benches that line the nave, letting the peace of the place wash over you like cool water. There's something about being inside these ancient walls that makes time feel different, not rushed or urgent, but flowing like honey, sweet and golden and unhurried. The church holds so many memories. You were baptized at that stone font by the door, your infant cries echoing off these same walls while your parents and godparents made promises on your behalf. You've sat in these pews through countless Sunday services, listening to Father Godwin's gentle homilies about loving your neighbor and caring for the poor. You've watched marriages blessed at that altar, seen young couples pledge their lives to each other while families wept happy tears. And you've stood here in sorrow too, when death came calling as it does to every household. The church has held your grief as surely as it's held your joy, its stones absorbing tears and laughter with equal compassion, its silence offering comfort that words never could. Father Godwin finishes his prayers and rises slowly, his knees creaking with age and long service. He notices you sitting quietly and approaches with the warm smile that has comforted your village for decades. "Good afternoon, my child," he says, his voice carrying that particular gentleness that comes from years of tending souls. "I trust you're well?" "Yes, Father," you reply. "I came seeking a moment of quiet. We had visitors this morning, Norman soldiers. It set me thinking." Father Godwin nods with understanding. He's heard about the morning's encounter, of course. In a village this size, news travels faster than ripples on still water. "Thinking can be good for the soul," he says, settling himself on the bench beside you. "Though sometimes it's best done in God's house, where the thoughts can be lifted up in prayer." You sit together in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who have known each other for years, sharing the peace that comes from familiar companionship. Outside, you can hear the distant sounds of village life. Children playing, someone chopping wood, a dog barking at something that probably isn't worth barking at. But inside these walls, all is stillness and contemplation. "Father," you say eventually, "do you think things will change much? With the new king?" Father Godwin considers this question with the care he brings to all matters of importance. His hands, weathered from years of blessing and breaking bread, fold peacefully in his lap. "Kings come and go," he says finally. I've served under 3 different kings in my time here. Each brought changes, some great, some small. But the church endures, and faith endures, and the need for God's comfort remains constant. He gestures around at the familiar space, his eyes taking in the simple altar with its worn wooden cross, the stone font where generations have been welcomed into the Christian family, the small side chapel where a statue of the Virgin Mary holds her eternal vigil. This church was here before William came, and God willing, it will be here long after we're all dust and memory. The Normans are Christian people, just as we are. They worship the same God, follow the same Christ, seek the same salvation. You find comfort in his words, in the steady certainty of his faith. There's something reassuring about the continuity he represents. The unbroken chain of prayer and worship that connects your small village to the great sweep of Christian history. Will there be changes, though, you ask? In how we worship, in the services? Father Godwin nods thoughtfully. Perhaps. I've heard that Norman bishops prefer certain prayers said in Latin rather than English, that they favor different saints, different ways of organizing the church year. But prayer is prayer, whether it's offered in Latin or English or any tongue under heaven. God hears them all. He pauses, looking up at the wooden beams that support the church roof. Beams cut from oak trees that grew in these forests when the church was young. I've also heard, he continues quietly, that King William means to replace Saxon bishops with Norman ones, to bring the English church more in line with practices in Normandy and Rome. There may be new rules, new requirements. Does that worry you, Father? The old priest smiles, and there's something in his expression that speaks of deep peace, of trust earned through decades of faithful service. At my age, my child, very little worries me. I've served God and this parish to the best of my ability. If changes come, we'll meet them with the same faith that sustained us through every other trial. And if a new bishop comes, well, he chuckles softly. I'll teach him what I can about our people, and he'll teach me what he can about his ways, and together we'll serve God as best we know how. Don't burden yourself with remembering all these details about bishops and Latin prayers. Let them drift through your mind like incense smoke, present but not overwhelming, part of the gentle flow of change that touches all things in their proper time. A shaft of late afternoon sunlight streams through one of the windows, illuminating the altar in golden light. Father Godwin rises and moves toward it, beginning the quiet preparations for evening prayers. You watch as he lights the candles one by one, each small flame adding its glow to the church's growing warmth. Would you like to stay for Vespers? He asks. It's nearly time. You nod, settling back into the familiar rhythm of the evening service. Soon, other villagers begin to arrive. Mary the baker's daughter, old Willem leaning on his stick, young Thomas and his mother. The same faces that have gathered here for years, perhaps thinking the same thoughts you've been thinking, seeking the same comfort in familiar rituals. Father Godwin's voice rises in the ancient prayers, words that have been spoken in this place for generations. The responses come naturally, flowing from your lips without conscious thought, as much a part of you as breathing. The Latin phrases and English translations blend together in a music that speaks to something deeper than understanding. As the service concludes and the last prayer fades into the gathering dusk, you feel a deep sense of continuity, of belonging to something larger than yourself or your village or even your time. The church will stand, the prayers will continue, the candles will be lit by faithful hands long after today's concerns have become tomorrow's memories. You step back out into the evening air, where the first stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The church door closes behind you with its familiar creak, but the peace you found within comes with you, settling into your heart like a blessing. The village around you continues its evening routines. Smoke rising from chimneys, families gathering for their evening meals, children being called in from their play. Life flows on, constant as the stream that runs past the mill, steady as the prayers that rise each day from the old church that stands at the heart of it all. As you walked back toward home, the church bell tolled the hour behind you, its bronze voice carrying across the fields the same message it had carried for countless generations. That some things endure, that faith remains constant, and that even in times of change, there are sanctuaries where the soul can find rest. The fire crackles gently as you sit on a worn wooden bench, its familiar warmth wrapping around you like an old friend's embrace. The scent of stew fills the small room, a rich mixture of barley, root vegetables, and herbs that have been simmering slowly over the coals since midday. Your stomach responds to the aroma with quiet appreciation, but there's no urgency here, just the peaceful anticipation of a meal shared among friends. You've been invited to sup with the family of Edmund the carpenter, whose cottage sits at the edge of the village where the cultivated fields give way to wild meadow. It's a modest home, built with the same careful craftsmanship that Edmund brings to all his work. Sturdy oak beams, walls of wattle and daub that keep out the evening chill, and a hearth that draws perfectly, sending its smoke up through the roof without filling the room. Edmund sits across from you, his weathered hands holding a wooden cup of ale. His wife, Margaret, tends the pot that hangs over the fire, stirring occasionally and tasting the broth with the practiced attention of someone who has cooked thousands of meals, but still cares that each one is just right. Their children, young Alice, barely old enough to help with the cooking, and Robert, who's learning his father's trade, sit nearby, content to listen to adult conversation while they wait for their supper. The evening light filters through the cottage's single window, where oiled cloth diffuses the last rays of sun into a golden glow that mingles with the firelight. Everything here speaks of lives lived simply but well. Wooden bowls polished smooth by countless meals, iron tools kept sharp and clean, dried herbs hanging from the rafters like fragrant promises of flavor. Edmund, you say, settling back against the wall, you've lived here longer than most. Your father and his father before him. They knew these lands when different kings held sway. Edmund nods slowly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He's a thoughtful man, one who chooses his words carefully and speaks from a well of experience earned through years of honest work and quiet observation. "Aye," he says. "My grandfather used to tell stories of the old days, when Danish kings ruled parts of England and Saxon kings ruled others. He'd sit just where you're sitting now and speak of Canute, and of Alfred before him. Great men, all of them, but distant as stars to folk like us." Margaret ladles the stew into wooden bowls, the steam rising like incense from each serving. She passes the bowls around with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has fed her family and their guests for many years. The first taste is perfect, hearty and warming, seasoned with thyme and sage from her own garden. "Tell us about King Harold," young Alice asks suddenly, her child's curiosity overcoming her usual shyness around guests. "Was he a good king?" Edmund considers this question while he chews thoughtfully. The fire pops and settles, sending up a shower of tiny sparks that disappear into the gathering darkness of the room's corners. "Harold Godwinson was a strong man," he says finally. "They say he could march his armies faster than any king before him. He fought the Danes in the north and rushed south to face the Normans all in the same month. A warrior's king, you might say. But not king for very long," Margaret adds quietly, not with criticism, but with the practical assessment of someone who has watched the great wheel of fortune turn many times. "No," Edmund agrees. "Less than a year he wore the crown. Makes you think about how quickly things can change, doesn't it? One day you're the most powerful man in England, the next." He shrugs, not needing to finish the thought. You all eat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the gentle scrape of wooden spoons against wooden bowls. There's something deeply satisfying about sharing a meal like this. Simple food made precious by the warmth of friendship and the comfort of familiar surroundings. "What was it like before?" Robert asks, his young voice carrying the weight of genuine curiosity. "Before the Normans came, I mean. Was everything different?" Edmund sets down his bowl and leans back, his carpenter's hands folded in his lap. The question seems to touch something deep in his memory, and when he speaks, his voice carries a note of gentle nostalgia. "Different? No, not so very different for people like us. We got up with the sun and worked until dark, same as now. We planted in spring and harvested in autumn, mended our tools and tended our animals. The great lords had their business, and we had ours." He pauses, looking into the fire as if he can see the past flickering in the flames. "But there were customs," he continues. "Ways of doing things that went back to when my grandfather's grandfather was young. The way disputes were settled, the way taxes were collected, the way a man could speak freely in the village moot without fear of giving offense to his betters." Margaret nods knowingly. "Remember the harvest festivals?" she asks. "The way the whole village would gather in the Lord's hall, and even the poorest peasant could sit at table with the reeve and speak his mind?" "Aye," Edmund says, his eyes growing distant. "There was something, I don't know the word for it, something English about the way things were done. Not better or worse than other ways, perhaps, just ours. Don't worry about grasping all the details of these old customs. Let them wash over you like the warm light from the fire, part of the gentle tapestry of memory and change that weaves through all our lives. Young Alice, who has been listening with the intense concentration that children bring to adult mysteries, speaks up again. Will the new king change everything? It's the question that everyone has been thinking, but no one has quite dared to ask directly. Edmund and Margaret exchange a look across the fire, the kind of wordless communication that passes between people who have shared decades of life together. Some things will change, Edmund says carefully. The new king brings new ways, new laws. We've already seen his soldiers, heard his requirements. There will be adjustments. But the important things, Margaret adds, her voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who has weathered many storms, the important things remain. We still have our family, our home, our work. We still have each other. Robert, practical like his father, asks, will we still be able to build houses the way we always have? With English oak and English methods. Edmund chuckles, and there's warmth in the sound. Son, a wall is a wall, whether it's built for a Saxon lord or a Norman one. Good craftsmanship is good craftsmanship. People will always need homes, and they'll always value work done well and true. The fire burns lower as the evening deepens, but no one moves to build it up just yet. There's something precious about this time when the flames settle into glowing coals, and the conversation flows as naturally as a stream finding its way to the sea. I remember, Edmund says, his voice growing soft with memory. When I was about Robert's age, there was a traveling storyteller who came to our village. He told tales of Arthur and his knights, of dragons and magical swords. But the story I remember best was simpler than that. He takes a sip of his ale and settles back, his eyes fixed on the dancing embers. He told of a great oak tree that grew beside a road where many travelers passed. Kings and peasants, merchants and pilgrims, all took shelter under its branches. Some carved their initials in its bark, others hung ribbons from its twigs. Wars came and went, kingdoms rose and fell, but the oak endured. It bent in storms but didn't break, lost leaves in winter but grew new ones each spring. Alice leans forward, enchanted by the story. What happened to the tree, Grandfather Edmund? It's still there, he says with a smile. Still growing, still giving shelter to anyone who needs it. Because that's what strong things do, they endure. They adapt. They find ways to keep growing even when the world around them changes. The message in his words is clear without being heavy-handed, and you feel it settle into your heart like a gentle blessing. Change comes to all things, but strength and goodness and the bonds between people. These endure through all transformations. Margaret begins to clear the bowls, and the evening meal draws naturally toward its close. But no one hurries. The fire still gives warmth, the ale still tastes good, and the company remains as comfortable as an old song. Outside, the night has fully arrived, bringing with it the sounds of a village settling into rest, doors closing, animals being secured for the night, mothers calling children to their beds. Inside this cottage, though, time moves more slowly, measured not by bells or sundials, but by the rhythm of shared stories and the comfort of friends gathered around a dying fire. As you prepare to take your leave, Edmund places a hand on your shoulder, and you feel the calluses earned by decades of honest work. Remember, he says quietly, whatever changes come, we're still the same people we were yesterday. Still neighbors, still friends, still folks who help each other when times are hard and celebrate together when times are good. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that danced gently on the walls, and you stepped back into the starlit night, carrying the warmth of shared stories and the quiet wisdom that comes from gathering around the hearth with those who matter most. The market hums softly as you weave through stalls. The air smells of fresh bread and damp wool, and your feet find their way along the familiar dirt paths between the wooden stands. It's early morning, and the mist still clings to the edges of the village square, wrapping everything in a gentle, dreamy haze. You pause by the baker's stall, where round loaves sit cooling on rough wooden planks. The baker's wife, her face flour-dusted and kind, nods to you with a smile that crinkles the corners of her eyes. The bread smells of warmth and home, of grain that grew in fields you know by heart. You can almost taste the nutty sweetness of the barley, the hearty comfort that will fill bellies through the long winter ahead. Around you, the market breathes with quiet life. A weaver displays her cloth, soft browns and muted greens, dyed with berries and bark from the forest's edge. Your fingers brush against the wool, feeling its rough comfort, imagining the sheep that wandered those same hills you call home. The texture speaks of honest work, of hands that know their craft, of threads spun by firelight during the long, quiet evenings. But today, something feels different in the market's gentle murmur. The conversations seem to carry a new weight, like stones dropped into still water. You catch whispers floating on the morning air, words about taxes, about new laws, about men with quills and parchment who ask questions that never needed asking before. An old merchant, his beard white as winter frost, leans close to his neighbor, and you hear fragments of their talk. "The king's men came through Ashford," he says, his voice barely above the rustle of leaves. "Counting everything, every pig, every chicken, every sack of grain." His companion nods slowly, worry creasing his weathered brow like furrows in a field. You don't need to understand all their words. Let them drift past you like clouds across the sky. What matters is the feeling underneath, the way change moves through a place like water through soil, slowly, quietly, but surely. The potter sits at her wheel, her hands shaping clay with the same gentle rhythm she's used for decades. Yet even she speaks of new demands. The Norman lords want finer vessels, she says, pottery glazed in ways her grandmother never knew. Her voice carries no anger, only the tired acceptance of someone who has watched the world shift many times before. A merchant from 3 villages over unpacks his cart of iron goods, tools and horseshoes that gleam dully in the morning light. He speaks of tolls on the roads now, of papers needed to travel, of new coins bearing a new king's face. The silver catches the light differently somehow, as if even the metal knows the world has changed. You pick up one of the coins, feeling its weight in your palm. It's still silver, still valuable, still able to buy bread and wool and all the simple necessities of life. But the face pressed into its surface belongs to William, the duke who came from across the sea, who now claims these fields and forests as his own. The spice merchant, a rare visitor to your small market, speaks of ships that carry pepper and cinnamon from lands so distant they might as well be dreams. He mentions how the new Norman lords hunger for these exotic flavors, how their tables groan under the weight of foods the Saxon kings never imagined. His spices smell of far-off places, warm and mysterious, like memories of summer on a winter's day. Yet beside his exotic wares, the familiar comforts remain. Honey from the village hives, its golden sweetness unchanged by any king's command. Apples from orchards that have grown here since before memory, their crisp flesh still tasting of autumn mornings and childhood dreams. A tinker mends pots with the same careful attention his father showed, and his father before that. The small sounds of his work, the gentle tap-tap-tap of his hammer, the scrape of metal on metal, create a rhythm as old as the village itself. Some things, you realize, remain constant even as the great wheel of history turns. The miller's wife sets out sacks of flour, white as fresh snow, ground from wheat that grew in the same fields your grandparents knew. She speaks softly of new requirements. A portion of every grinding must go to the Norman lord now, she says. But her flour still feels the same between your fingers, still promises the same warm bread, the same nourishment for the long winter ahead. Children dart between the stalls like sparrows, their laughter unchanged by any conquest. They play the same games you played at their age, speak the same Saxon words their great-grandchildren might still speak decades from now. Their voices rise and fall like music, reminding you that some joys are too deep for any king to touch. An old woman sells herbs from her garden, sage and thyme, rosemary and mint. She knows their secrets, their healing properties, and their ability to soothe both body and spirit. Her knowledge, passed down through generations of village-wise women, remains as valuable under Norman rule as it was under Saxon kings. She presses a sprig of lavender into your palm, its purple flowers still holding the memory of summer sunshine. The blacksmith's hammer rings from his forge at the market's edge, shaping iron that will serve Norman and Saxon alike. His fire burns the same bright orange, his iron glows the same cherry red. The tools he makes will plow the same fields, harvest the same grain, and build the same humble homes where families gather around the same warm hearths. As the morning wears on, you notice how the villagers adapt, slowly, carefully, like plants bending toward a new sun. They learn the Norman words for taxes and tithes, and practice the pronunciation of their new lord's name. But underneath these surface changes, the deeper rhythms of life continue unchanged. The morning market begins to wind down as the sun climbs higher, burning away the last wisps of mist. The bread sellers pack away their remaining loaves, the cloth merchants fold their wares with practiced hands. The conversations continue, but softer now, as if the bright daylight has revealed that perhaps the changes aren't quite as fearsome as the darkness made them seem. You help an elderly farmer load his cart with the goods he couldn't sell, turnips and cabbages that will keep his family fed through the winter months ahead. His hands are gnarled with age and work, but they're steady, sure. He's survived other changes, other kings, other times when the world seemed to shift beneath his feet. It's all the same earth, he says quietly, as if reading your thoughts. Same rain, same sun, same seasons turning. Kings come and go, but the land remains. His words settle into your mind like seeds finding fertile soil. As you prepare to leave the market, you pause to watch a young mother teaching her daughter to feel the ripeness of pears. The child's small fingers learn the gentle pressure that reveals sweetness, the subtle signs that speak of readiness. This knowledge, too, will pass unchanged from generation to generation, as valuable under Norman rule as it ever was. The village priest walks among the stalls, blessing the merchants and their wares with the same gentle benedictions he's offered for years. His Latin may sound the same, but now it carries the weight of new questions. How much will the new Norman bishops change? How much will remain? His smile suggests that faith, like the earth itself, has deeper roots than any conquest can touch. You begin to walk home as the market settles into its midday quiet. Behind you, the gentle sounds fade. The murmur of final conversations, the creak of cart wheels, the soft lowing of cattle waiting patiently for their owners to finish their business. These sounds feel like a lullaby, familiar and comforting, wrapping around you like your mother's arms when you were small. The path home winds between fields where the last of the harvest waits to be gathered. The grain stands golden in the afternoon light, heavy with promise, ready to become the bread that will sustain the village through winter's embrace. It doesn't matter to the wheat which king claims the land. It grows the same, ripens the same, offers the same nourishment to any who tend it with care. As you walk, you carry with you the memory of the market's gentle murmur, the sound of a community adapting, surviving, continuing. Change may come like the tide, washing over the familiar shores of life, but the bedrock remains solid, enduring, unchanged. The villagers will learn new words, pay new taxes, and bow to new lords. But they'll still break bread together, still share stories by the fire, still watch the stars will overhead in their ancient patterns. Some things run deeper than conquest, stronger than kings, more enduring than the rise and fall of dynasties. As the sun dipped low, you wandered home, the market's hum fading behind you like a half-remembered song. Your feet knew the path without thinking, carrying you past the familiar fields, past the old oak tree where you played as a child, past the stream that has murmured the same gentle melody for longer than anyone can remember. The evening air carries the scent of wood smoke from 100 hearths, each one a beacon of home, of continuity, of the simple human needs that no conquest can change. Somewhere, families are gathering for their evening meal. Children are learning their prayers. Lovers are walking hand in hand beneath the first stars of night. And you are part of this gentle flow of life, this river of human experience that runs deeper than any single moment in time. Let yourself drift with it now, like a leaf on a quiet stream, carried gently toward the peaceful shores of sleep. Tomorrow will bring its own small wonders, its own quiet revelations. But for now, rest. Let the market's gentle murmur fade into dreams, and know that some things never change. The need for rest, the comfort of home, the promise that morning will always come again, soft and new and full of gentle possibilities. The world turns quietly on, and you turn with it, drifting softly towards sleep. The trees stand tall and silent as you step into the forest. Moss cushions your feet like nature's own carpet, and a bird calls softly from somewhere high in the canopy above. The air here feels different, cooler, older, thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves that have been quietly returning to the soil for countless seasons. You pause at the forest's edge, where the last rays of morning sunlight filter through the branches like golden threads in a tapestry. This is the royal forest now, King William's forest. Though the ancient oaks remember when no man claimed to own them, when they simply grew and flourished under Saxon sky, belonging only to themselves and the creatures that sheltered in their embrace. Your footsteps make barely a whisper on the soft forest floor as you follow a path that deer have worn smooth over generations. Around you, the trees rise like the pillars of some great cathedral, oak and ash, beech and elm. Their trunks so massive that 3 men with outstretched arms could not encircle them. They were old when your grandfather was young, and they will stand long after your own children have become memories. The forest holds its breath around you, as if listening to your thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, a stream trickles over stones worn smooth by centuries of patient water. The sound is like a lullaby, constant and comforting, a reminder that some rhythms are older than kingdoms, deeper than the concerns of kings and conquerors. You remember walking these same paths as a child, when your father brought you here to gather mushrooms and deadfall for the fire. Back then, any villager could enter freely, could hunt the rabbits and birds, could collect the nuts and berries that the forest offered with generous hands. The forest belonged to everyone and no one, a commons shared by all who knew how to walk softly and take only what they needed. But now there are new laws written on parchment in Norman French, laws that say this ancient woodland belongs to the king alone. The rabbits and deer, the wild boar that root among the oak leaves, even the birds that nest in the highest branches. All of them are the king's property now, protected by penalties that can cost a poor man his hand, or even his life. Yet as you walk deeper into the green shadows, it's hard to believe that any mortal man could truly own this place. The forest has its own laws, older than any written word. The law of seasons turning, of life feeding life, of death becoming birth in the endless cycle that no king can command or change. A red squirrel scolds you from an oak branch, chattering with indignation at your intrusion into its domain. It doesn't know or care about Norman law. It simply gathers its winter store of acorns, following the ancient wisdom that autumn's abundance must prepare for winter's lean months. You smile at its fierce independence, this tiny creature that recognizes no human authority. Shafts of sunlight pierce the canopy here and there, creating pools of golden warmth where wildflowers still bloom despite the growing chill of late autumn. You kneel beside a patch of wood sorrel, its heart-shaped leaves catching the light like tiny green lanterns. Your grandmother taught you that these leaves could soothe a sore throat when chewed, that the forest held remedies for every ailment if you knew where to look. That knowledge feels precious now, a secret shared between you and the woodland itself. The Norman lords may claim ownership of the trees and streams, but they cannot possess the forest's deeper wisdom, cannot buy or command the subtle lessons that oak and ash whisper to those who know how to listen. You follow the stream deeper into the forest's heart, where the trees grow so thick that twilight reigns even at midday. Here, in this green cathedral, you can almost hear the footsteps of all who walked before you. Saxon thanes and village children, wise women gathering herbs, hunters tracking the red deer through morning mist. The water runs clear and cold over a bed of smooth pebbles, each stone polished by countless seasons of patient flow. You cup your hands and drink, tasting the forest's own essence, clean and wild and free. This water has never known the touch of ownership, has never been claimed by any king or lord. It simply flows as it has always flowed, following the ancient paths carved by its own persistence. A doe steps delicately through the undergrowth, her coat the color of autumn leaves, her dark eyes watchful but unafraid. She's learned to recognize the difference between those who walk with gentle hearts and those who come with hounds and hunting horns. For a long moment, you watch each other across the small clearing, two creatures sharing the forest's peaceful embrace. She moves on eventually, white tail flickering like a blessing as she disappears between the trees. You know that King William loves to hunt, that he brings his nobles into forests like this one to chase the deer with great ceremony and celebration. But here, now, in this moment of quiet communion, you've shared something with that doe that no royal hunt could ever capture. A recognition, a mutual respect, an acknowledgement of each other's place in the forest's grand design. You settle against the trunk of an ancient beech, its bark smooth and gray like an elephant's skin. From this spot, you can see how the forest layers itself. The tall canopy overhead, the smaller trees reaching for scattered sunlight, the shrubs and ferns carpeting the forest floor, all living together in a harmony that no human law could ever orchestrate. The tree at your back has weathered countless storms, has watched the rise and fall of kings and kingdoms, has sheltered countless generations of birds and squirrels, and perhaps even the occasional weary traveler like yourself. Its roots run deep into the earth, drawing sustenance from soil enriched by 1,000 years of fallen leaves, connecting it to a network of life that spans the entire forest. You close your eyes and listen to the forest's symphony, the rustle of leaves in the barely perceptible breeze, the distant call of a wood pigeon, the soft scurrying of some small creature through the underbrush. These sounds have echoed through these woods since long before the Normans came, since before the Saxons themselves first crossed the sea to these shores. The forest remembers them all, Roman legions marching along straight roads, Saxon warriors seeking refuge in the green depths, Danish raiders following river paths to the sea. All have passed through these woods, all have claimed dominion in their time, But the forest outlasts them all, patient and enduring, offering its shade and shelter to any who approach with respect. A shaft of afternoon sunlight finds its way through the leaves above, warming your face with gentle fingers. In that golden light, you can almost see the dance of seasons past and future. Spring's tender green unfurling, summer's deep shade and buzzing life, autumn's brilliant display of red and gold, winter's stark beauty and quiet rest. Each season brings its own gifts, its own lessons. Spring teaches hope and renewal. Summer shows the abundance possible when life finds its proper rhythm. Autumn demonstrates the grace of letting go, and winter reveals the strength that comes from deep rest and patient waiting. You think of King William, building his castles of stone, writing his laws on parchment, counting his possessions with careful attention to detail. All of that feels very far away here in the forest's embrace, as distant and unreal as a tale told by firelight. Power and ownership, conquest and submission. Such concepts seem to have no meaning among these ancient trees. Here, the only law is the law of seasons, the only king is time itself, moving with inexorable patience through its endless cycles. The forest has seen the rise and fall of countless human ambitions, has watched empires crumble back to dust while the trees continue their slow growth toward the light. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves overhead, creating a soft susurrus like the whispered prayers of countless generations. The sound is hypnotic, peaceful, drawing you deeper into the forest's timeless rhythm. Your breathing slows to match the ancient pulse of this place, your heartbeat synchronizing with the deep, slow circulation of sap in the massive trunk at your back. You could stay here forever. You think drowsily, becoming part of the forest's patient vigil, growing roots that reach deep into the earth's wisdom, branches that stretch toward the infinite sky. The thought doesn't frighten you. Instead, it feels like coming home, like finding your true place in the great web of life that connects all things. As the afternoon light begins to fade, you know it's time to return to the village, to the world of human concerns and Norman laws. But you carry the forest with you now. Its peace, its patience, its reminder that some things remain constant even as kingdoms rise and fall. You rise slowly from your resting place, your hand touching the beech's bark in a gesture of gratitude. The tree seems to nod in the evening breeze, as if blessing your journey back to the world of men and their brief, busy lives. The path home winds gently between the trees, each step taking you from the forest's timeless realm back toward the village's warm lights. But you'll return, you know, drawn by the peace you found here, by the wisdom that ancient trees whisper to those who take time to listen. The forest seemed to hold its breath as you turned back, the path leading gently onward, carrying with you the memory of that sacred silence, that moment of perfect communion with something larger and older and more enduring than any human kingdom. Behind you, the trees settled into evening's embrace, keeping their eternal watch, holding their secrets safe until your next visit. And in your heart, you carried a piece of their peace, a fragment of their timeless wisdom, as gentle and constant as your own breathing. The forest dreams on, and you drift with it, into sleep as deep and peaceful as the woodland's ancient rest. The rhythmic clack of the loom fills the air as you sit nearby. Threads of wool dance under her skilled hands, creating patterns that seem to hold stories within their weave. The cottage is small and warm, filled with the earthy scent of undyed wool and the subtle fragrance of herbs hanging from the rafters to dry. Edith has been weaving since she was barely tall enough to reach the threads. Her fingers move with the certainty that comes from decades of practice, pulling and pushing, lifting and lowering, creating cloth from what was once simply fleece on a sheep's back. The loom itself is ancient, built by her grandfather's grandfather, its wooden frame worn smooth by countless hands. You watch as the pattern emerges slowly, row by careful row. Today she weaves a simple brown cloth, the color of good earth, dyed with bark from the oak trees that grow at the village's edge. It will become a cloak for her youngest son, something to keep him warm through the winter months ahead. As she works, Edith tells you about her grandmother, who learned to weave in the days when King Alfred ruled the land. That was a time of great change too, she says, when the Danish raiders swept down from the north like wolves, burning and pillaging everything in their path. But life went on, as it always does. Women still spun their wool, still wove their cloth, still clothed their families against the cold. Her grandmother had told her stories of even earlier times, when the Romans walked these lands in their strange armor, building their straight roads and their stone walls. Even then, Edith says with a gentle smile, women were spinning and weaving, creating the cloth that kept their loved ones warm and decent. The shuttle passes back and forth through the threads, carrying the weft across the warp in its ancient dance. Each pass is like a breath, steady and rhythmic, creating a meditation that seems to slow time itself. You can almost feel the centuries flowing through this simple act, connecting Edith to all the women who came before her, all who will come after. She speaks of the changes that have come with King William's victory. The Norman ladies want different cloth now, she explains, finer weaves with tighter patterns, colors that require dyes from distant lands rather than the familiar browns and greens that her people have always used. They want silk threads worked into the wool, creating a richness that Saxon nobility never demanded. But Edith adapts, as weavers have always adapted. She learns new patterns from traveling merchants, trades with dyers who know the secrets of creating brilliant reds and deep blues. Her loom may be the same one her ancestors used, but the cloth it creates evolves with the times, serving the needs of Norman lords while still keeping Saxon villagers warm. The afternoon light streams through the small window, illuminating the dust motes that dance in the air like tiny spirits. Edith pauses in her work to adjust the tension on a thread, her movements precise and confident. This is more than craft, you realize. It is a form of prayer, a way of staying connected to the deep rhythms of life that continue regardless of which king sits on the throne. She tells you about the wool itself, how it comes from sheep that graze the same hills her grandfather knew, animals that grow their fleece according to seasons far older than any human kingdom. The wool remembers the rain that fed the grass, the sunshine that warmed the pastures, the careful hands that sheared it when the time was right. Spinning the wool into thread is its own art, Edith explains, requiring patience and skill that cannot be hurried. The spindle turns in her practiced hands as she demonstrates, drawing out the fibers in a thin, strong line that will become part of tomorrow's weaving. Each thread is a small miracle, she says, countless tiny fibers twisted together to create something stronger than any of them could be alone. The dye pot sits cooling by the fire, filled with the remnants of today's work. She shows you the depths of color possible from simple things: the bark of trees, the leaves of plants, the roots that grow hidden in the earth. Each season brings its own palette, she explains. Spring offers the tender greens of new growth. Summer provides the bright yellows of flowering plants. Autumn delivers the rich browns and russets of dying leaves. Her daughter sits in the corner, learning to card wool with the patience that comes naturally to the very young. The girl's movements are still uncertain, her technique rough, but her mother watches with approval. This knowledge must be passed down, Edith says, from mother to daughter, teacher to student, an unbroken chain stretching back to the very first woman who discovered that sheep's fleece could be transformed into warm, protective cloth. The Norman lords may change the fashions, may demand new colors and finer textures, but the basic skills remain the same. Thread is still thread, cloth is still cloth, and people still need protection from the cold and rain. The loom cares nothing for politics or conquest. It simply creates, row by steady row, whatever pattern the weaver's hands guide it to make. Edith speaks of her husband, who tends sheep in the hills above the village. He knows each animal by sight, understands which ewes produce the finest fleece, which rams will father the next generation of wool bearers. Together, they form a partnership as old as civilization itself. He provides the raw material. She transforms it into something useful and beautiful. The sheep themselves are largely unchanged by Norman rule, she laughs. They still grow their fleece according to the ancient schedule, still need to be sheared when the warm weather comes, still produce the wool that keeps the world clothed. Some things, she suggests, are too fundamental to be altered by the whims of kings and conquerors. As evening approaches, Edith begins to wind down her work for the day. The loom will rest until morning, but the threads will remain under tension, holding their places in the growing pattern. Tomorrow she will take up where she left off, adding row upon row until the cloth is complete, ready to be cut and sewn into garments that will serve their wearers well. She offers you a cup of ale and a place by her fire, the hospitality that weavers have always shown to travelers and neighbors. The ale is warm and slightly sweet, made from barley grown in fields that have fed this village for generations beyond counting. It tastes of home, of continuity, of the simple pleasures that make life worth living. The conversation turns to the future, to what changes might yet come as the Norman hold on England grows stronger. Edith is philosophical about it all. Conquerors come and go, she says, but people still need cloth. They still need warmth, still need protection from the elements, still need the comfort that comes from wrapping themselves in something made with care and skill. Her ancestors weathered the Roman withdrawal, survived the Saxon invasions, endured the Danish raids. Each time, the world seemed to end, but it never quite did. The loom kept turning, the shuttle kept flying, the cloth kept growing under patient hands. And it will continue long after William's reign has become just another chapter in the long story of this land. The fire burns low as the evening deepens, casting dancing shadows on the walls where skeins of wool hang like sleeping spirits. Edith's voice grows softer as she speaks of the patterns her grandmother taught her, designs that carry meaning beyond their simple beauty. Some are protection symbols, meant to keep the wearer safe from harm. Others represent fertility and abundance, hopes woven into the very fabric of daily life. You help her bank the fire for the night, ensuring the coals will stay alive until morning when they'll be needed again to warm the cottage and light the work. This too is part of the ancient rhythm, the careful tending of flame, the preservation of heat and light through the dark hours, the promise that warmth will return with the dawn. Outside, the village settles into its nightly quiet, but inside the weaver's cottage, the sense of continuity remains strong. The loom stands ready for tomorrow's work, the wool waits to be transformed. The patterns live on in capable hands. Change may come like wind across the moors, but the deeper currents of life flow steady and sure, carrying the essential skills from one generation to the next. As you prepare to leave, Edith presses a small piece of her finest cloth into your hands, a token of friendship, a reminder of the afternoons spent in her peaceful cottage. The wool is soft and warm, dyed the deep blue of summer twilight, woven with a skill that speaks of generations of accumulated wisdom. Her voice faded into the evening, and the world spun quietly on, carrying with it the ancient rhythm of shuttle and thread, the patient transformation of simple fleece into the cloth that clothes a kingdom, the enduring knowledge that some crafts are too essential to ever truly disappear. You step out into the gathering darkness, the weaver's gift warm in your hands, understanding a little better how civilization continues even when everything seems to be changing, how the essential skills pass from hand to hand like precious flames, lighting the way forward through whatever storms may come. The river glints under the midday sun as you sit on its grassy bank. Water laps gently at the shore, creating a rhythm as old as the land itself. The current moves with unhurried purpose, carrying leaves and small branches downstream toward distant villages, toward the great ports where ships wait to carry goods across the narrow sea to Normandy. You've come to this bend in the river many times before, drawn by its peaceful constancy. The willows that line the bank have grown familiar over the years, their trailing branches now thick enough to create pools of shade where the water runs deep and quiet. A kingfisher darts across the surface, its brilliant blue flash like a jewel against the brown water, reminding you that some things remain beautifully unchanged. But today the river carries more than leaves and kingfisher songs. A boat rounds the bend upstream, its wooden hull riding low in the water under the weight of cargo. The oarsman works steadily against the current, his practiced strokes cutting through the water with efficient grace. He nods as he passes, recognizing you as a fellow child of these riverlands, someone who understands the water's moods and seasons. The boat disappears around the next bend, but you know where it's bound. Norman lords in their new stone castles have developed appetites for goods that the local fields cannot provide. Wine from distant vineyards, salt from coastal marshes, iron tools forged in workshops far from here. The river has become a highway of commerce, connecting your quiet village to a wider world that grows more complex with each passing season. You remember when these waters carried simpler cargo. Saxon merchants bringing pottery from neighboring villages, farmers moving grain to market towns, fishermen sharing their catch with communities up and down the waterway. The river served local needs then, connecting people who knew each other's names, who shared the same language and the same understanding of how life should be lived. A family of ducks paddles past, the adults keeping their young ones close to the reedy shallows where they can find safety and food. The ducklings follow their parents with absolute trust, learning the ancient lessons of river life, where to find the sweetest water plants, how to read the current's mood, when to dive deep, and when to float peacefully on the surface. The water itself remains unchanged, of course. It still rises with the spring rains, still runs clear after summer storms wash the dust from the land. It still provides the same services it always has: water for drinking and washing, fish for eating, power for the mill wheels that grind grain into flour. The river recognizes no earthly authority, follows no human law except the fundamental pull of gravity that draws all water toward the sea. Another boat appears, this one heading upstream against the current. Two men work the oars while a third manages the steering paddle, their coordinated efforts making slow but steady progress against the river's flow. Their cargo is covered with oiled cloth, but you can guess what lies beneath. Goods returning from Norman markets, perhaps cloth dyed in the new fashions, or tools made to Norman specifications. The boatmen call out a greeting as they pass, their voices carrying easily across the water. One asks about the road conditions ahead, whether the recent rains have made the paths too muddy for carts. You share what you know, part of the informal network of information that flows along the river as surely as the water itself. This exchange reminds you of how the river has always been more than just water flowing between banks. It's a lifeline of communication, a highway for news and gossip, a place where travelers pause to rest and share stories. The Norman conquest may have changed who controls the cargo, but it hasn't altered the river's fundamental role as a connector of communities. A heron stands motionless in the shallows, its sharp eyes focused on the water with infinite patience. You've watched herons fish before, marveling at their ability to remain perfectly still for what seems like hours, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. When that moment comes, the movement is swift and sure, a lesson in the value of patience and perfect timing. The afternoon sun warms your face as you lean back against a fallen log that has become a natural seat for river watchers like yourself. The wood is smooth and weathered, polished by countless seasons of flood and drought, sun and rain. It serves its purpose now not as a living tree, but as a resting place, still useful in its new form. Trade boats continue to pass at irregular intervals, each one a story of changing times. Some carry stone from quarries to build Norman castles. Others transport wool to be woven into cloth for Norman ladies. A few still carry the simple goods of Saxon life, honey and ale, leather goods and wooden tools. But even these seem somehow different now, part of a larger economy that stretches far beyond the familiar boundaries of village life. You notice how the boatmen adapt to their changing cargo. The same skills that once moved grain and pottery now transport luxuries and raw materials for Norman construction projects. The river doesn't care what it carries. Water supports all loads equally, asks no questions about the politics of its cargo. A fish jumps near the far bank, its silver body catching the sunlight for a brief moment before disappearing back into the depths. The ripples spread outward in perfect circles, eventually reaching the shore where you sit, a reminder of how even the smallest disturbance in one place can be felt far away. The mill will turn steadily downstream, its wooden paddles catching the current and transforming the river's motion into the power needed to grind grain. The same water that carries Norman goods also powers Saxon millstones, serving both conqueror and conquered with equal generosity. The miller waves from his doorway, flour dusting his apron, his work continuing regardless of which king claims the throne. As you sit by the flowing water, you begin to understand something about the nature of change itself. Like the river, it moves according to its own logic, following channels carved by forces larger than any individual will. People can try to direct it, build dams and levees to control its flow, but ultimately the water finds its way to the sea by whatever route the land provides. The Norman conquest is like a great flood, you think, sweeping away familiar landmarks and carving new channels through the landscape of daily life. But the essential nature of the land remains unchanged. The same soil that grew Saxon grain will nourish Norman crops. The same rivers that carried Saxon boats will transport Norman goods. The same people who bent their backs to Saxon lords will serve Norman masters, adapting as they always have to the demands of whoever holds power. A young woman appears on the opposite bank, carrying a wooden bucket to fill with river water. She moves with the careful grace of someone who has made this journey countless times, knowing exactly where to step to avoid the muddy spots, which stones provide the surest footing. Her daily routine continues unchanged, one small constant in a world where so much else seems to be shifting. The sun begins its afternoon decline, painting the water with golden light that dances and shimmers with each small wavelet. The river seems to hold the light within itself, carrying brightness downstream along with everything else that enters its flowing embrace. You could watch this play of light and water forever, finding in it a kind of peace that no human conflict can disturb. A merchant's boat rounds the bend, larger than the others you've seen today, requiring 4 oarsmen to make progress against the current. The cargo is clearly valuable, covered not just with oiled cloth, but also guarded by men with weapons. Norman silver, perhaps, or rare spices from the markets of London. The sight reminds you that wealth, like water, tends to flow toward power, following new channels carved by conquest. Yet as the valuable cargo disappears upstream, you notice a small fishing boat following in its wake, taking advantage of the disturbed water to catch fish stirred up by the passage of the larger vessel. The fisherman casts his net with practiced skill, turning the merchant's disturbance into his own opportunity. Life finds a way to adapt, to benefit from change even when it seems threatening. The day grows longer as you sit in contemplation by the flowing water. Other people come and go along the riverbank. Children skipping stones, women washing clothes, men checking their fishing lines. Each person brings their own needs and purposes to the river, but the water serves them all equally, asking nothing in return but the respect that ensures its continued flowing. You think about the journey this water has taken to reach you. It began as rain falling on distant hills, gathering in small streams that merged into larger ones, carrying the essence of the land it touched along its winding path to the sea. By the time it passes your resting place, it holds within itself the stories of 100 villages, the minerals of countless fields, the memories of everyone who has ever drawn from its depths. And after it passes you, it will continue its ancient journey, carrying new stories, serving new needs, but always following the fundamental law that draws all water toward the ocean. The river connects not just places but times, linking the rain that fell yesterday with the sea that will receive it tomorrow, creating a flow of continuity that no human authority can break or redirect for long. The evening light begins to slant across the water as your day by the river draws toward its close. The boats have become fewer, their crews eager to reach their destinations before darkness makes navigation treacherous. The peaceful sounds of lapping water and rustling reeds grow more prominent as human activity diminishes. A family of swans glides past with serene dignity, their long necks curved in perfect grace, their white feathers catching the last rays of sunlight. They move as if they own the river, which in a sense they do, their claim older and more natural than any parchment deed, their presence a reminder that the water belongs ultimately to the creatures it sustains. As you prepare to leave your peaceful vigil, you cup your hands and drink from the river, tasting the essential sweetness that no amount of Norman law can alter. The water is cool and clean, carrying the flavor of the stones it has flowed over, the plants it has nourished, the life it has sustained for countless generations. You rise slowly from your comfortable spot by the flowing water, brushing grass from your clothes, taking one last look at the scene that has brought you such peace. Tomorrow the river will still be here, still flowing toward the sea, still carrying its cargo of goods and stories, dreams and necessities. Some things, you realize, are too fundamental to be changed by the rise and fall of kingdoms. The river carried its secrets downstream, and your thoughts drifted with it, toward the distant sea where all waters eventually find their home, toward the peaceful certainty that some flows are too deep and constant to be altered by the temporary storms that rage across the surface of human affairs. Walking home in the gathering dusk, you carry with you the river's lesson of patient persistence, its demonstration that the most lasting changes come not from force but from the steady, gentle pressure of time itself, wearing new channels through the landscape of possibility with the quiet determination of water seeking its own level. The clink of chisels echoes across the valley as you pause on a hill. Stones rise slowly into walls, each block carefully shaped and fitted by hands that know the secret language of rock and mortar. Below you, the castle grows like a living thing, emerging from the earth with the patient determination of something meant to last for centuries. You've watched this construction for months now, fascinated by the transformation of raw stone into fortress walls. What began as a collection of quarried blocks scattered across a muddy hilltop has become the foundation of Norman power in your region, a statement written in limestone and oak that speaks of permanence and authority. The masons work with quiet concentration, their movements economical and precise. These are not local men, you realize, but craftsmen brought from Normandy itself, masters of techniques that Saxon builders never learned. They shape stone with a skill that seems almost magical, turning rough blocks into perfectly fitted courses that will stand long after everyone now living has returned to dust. Master Guillaume directs the work from a wooden platform that gives him a clear view of the entire construction site. His weathered hands hold the plans drawn on precious parchment, architectural knowledge that represents generations of Norman building wisdom. He calls out instructions in Norman French, his voice carrying easily across the busy site, coordinating the efforts of dozens of workers like a conductor leading a complex musical performance. The local men serve as laborers, hauling stone from the quarry in wooden carts drawn by oxen that strain against their heavy loads. Their faces show the resignation of people who understand they're building their own cage, constructing the very fortress that will ensure their continued subjugation. Yet they work steadily, needing the wages that castle construction provides, feeding their families with Norman silver earned by Norman stone. You watch a young mason carefully carving decorative details around what will become a window opening. His chisel moves with delicate precision, creating patterns that echo the ornate style favored by Norman nobility. Each curl and flourish requires skill developed over years of apprenticeship, knowledge passed down through generations of stone carvers who served Norman dukes and counts. The stones themselves come from a quarry in the hills, limestone that has waited in darkness for millions of years to serve this purpose. Each block carries within itself the memory of ancient seas, the compressed remains of countless tiny creatures that lived and died when the world was young. Now that patient stone serves Norman ambition, shaped by human tools into walls designed to project power across the surrounding countryside. A line of workers passes buckets of mortar up scaffolding that clings to the growing walls like wooden ivy. The mortar smells of lime and sand, mixed with water drawn from the same stream that serves the village below. When it hardens, this simple mixture will bind the stones together with strength that will outlast the men who made it, creating joints that grow stronger with age. The castle's position commands the valley with strategic precision. From its walls, Norman soldiers will be able to see for miles in every direction, monitoring the roads that connect village to village, ensuring that no significant movement escapes their notice. The site was chosen not for beauty, but for control, selected by military minds that understand how geography shapes power. You remember when this hilltop was simply a place where shepherds brought their flocks to graze the sweet grass that grew in the limestone soil. Children played among the scattered rocks, inventing games and stories, never imagining that one day those same rocks would be quarried and shaped into walls designed to keep them in their place. The rhythmic sound of hammers on stone creates a steady percussion that echoes off the valley walls. Each blow is purposeful, part of a larger symphony of construction that transforms raw materials into architecture. The masons work in teams, one holding the chisel while another strikes with the hammer, their movements synchronized through long practice and mutual trust. Wooden cranes lift the heaviest stones into position, operated by men who walk in circles inside large wheels, their weight providing the power needed to raise blocks that would challenge a dozen strong backs. The technology is simple but effective, proof that human ingenuity can overcome the limitations of muscle and bone through clever application of leverage and patience. The castle's design follows patterns established in Normandy itself, architectural traditions refined through generations of fortress building. High walls topped with battlements, narrow windows that provide light while limiting vulnerability, gates designed to funnel attackers into killing zones where defenders hold every advantage. This is not merely a building, but a weapon made of stone, every detail calculated to project and preserve Norman authority. Local craftsmen work alongside the Norman masters, learning new techniques that will change building practices throughout the region. A Saxon carpenter studies the precise joinery used in Norman roof construction, understanding that these methods will soon be in demand as other Norman lords build their own strongholds. Knowledge flows both ways across the language barrier, creating a blend of traditions that will outlast the conquest itself. The Great Hall rises at the castle's heart, its soaring walls designed to impress visitors with the scale of Norman ambition. Here the lord will hold court, dispensing justice according to Norman law, receiving the homage of Saxon thanes who must swear loyalty or face the consequences. The hall's architecture speaks of power, even when empty, its stone vault echoing with the authority of the new order. You notice how the masons adapt their work to local conditions. The limestone quarried nearby requires different techniques than the stone they worked in Normandy, forcing them to modify their traditional methods. Even master craftsmen must learn from the land itself, discovering how English rock responds to chisel and hammer, how English mortar sets in English weather. The walls grow thicker at the base, tapering slightly as they rise, a design that provides maximum stability while conserving materials and labor. Every aspect of the construction reflects careful calculation, the accumulated wisdom of engineers who understand how stone behaves under different stresses, how walls can be made to stand against both weather and warfare. A group of young apprentices mix mortar in wooden troughs, learning the precise proportions of lime, sand, and water that create the strongest bonds. Their master watches carefully, correcting technique with patient instruction that will shape their understanding for years to come. This knowledge, once mastered, will spread throughout England as these apprentices become masters themselves. The castle's kitchen takes shape in one corner of the main courtyard. Its massive fireplace is designed to feed a household that might number in the hundreds during times of siege or celebration. The scale reflects Norman ambitions for hospitality and display, the need to demonstrate wealth through generous provision for guests and retainers. Water presents a constant challenge in castle design. Wells must be dug deep enough to reach reliable sources, cisterns constructed to store rainwater, drainage channels carved to prevent flooding of the lower levels. The masons work with engineers who understand hydraulics, ensuring that the fortress will never lack for this most essential resource. Scaffolding rises alongside the walls, wooden platforms that allow workers to reach ever higher points of construction. The scaffolding itself represents considerable engineering skill, designed to support not just workers, but also the heavy stones they must position. These temporary structures must be as carefully planned as the permanent walls they serve. The quarry provides more than just building stone. Masons select different grades of limestone for different purposes. The finest, most easily worked stone for decorative elements, harder varieties for load-bearing walls, rough fieldstone for foundations that will never be seen. Each type of stone requires its own techniques, its own tools, its own understanding of how the material will behave. Local women bring food and drink to the workers, understanding that castle construction brings needed employment to the region, even as it represents their own subjugation. They move among the masons with quiet efficiency, offering bread and ale to fuel the work that transforms their landscape, their lives, their future. The castle's chapel takes form near the main hall, its design following the Norman style of church architecture that emphasizes height and light. This sacred space will serve both the spiritual needs of the garrison and the political requirement to demonstrate Christian authority over a newly conquered land. Master Guillaume examines each day's work with critical eyes, checking joints for tightness, walls for plumb, surfaces for the smoothness that marks truly skilled craftsmanship. His standards are exacting because he knows this castle must last for generations, must withstand not only military assault, but also the patient erosion of wind and weather. The waste from stone cutting accumulates in growing piles around the construction site, chips and dust that represent the difference between rough quarry blocks and finished masonry. Eventually, this debris will be used to fill gaps and level surfaces. Nothing wasted in a project where every material has been hauled up the hill at considerable effort. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the construction site, the pace of work remains steady but unhurried. Stone cutting cannot be rushed without risking mistakes that might weaken the entire structure. Each block must be shaped with patience, fitted with care, sealed with mortar mixed to exacting standards. You watch a master mason teaching a young apprentice the proper way to hold a chisel, how to read the grain of the stone, where to strike for maximum effect with minimum effort. This knowledge, passed from master to student, represents a tradition that stretches back through centuries of building, connecting this English castle to Gothic cathedrals and Roman amphitheaters. The sun begins to sink toward the horizon as the working day draws toward its close. Tools are cleaned and stored, scaffolding checked for stability, work areas cleared of debris that might pose hazards in tomorrow's labor. The castle sleeps under its growing walls, protected by guards who understand that this construction site is as valuable as any completed fortress. The evening light paints the growing walls with golden hues that soften their martial purpose, making them seem almost beautiful rather than threatening. In this gentle light, the castle appears less like a weapon and more like a work of art, testament to human skill and ambition applied to the ancient challenge of shaping stone to serve human purposes. As dusk settled, the hammers fell silent, and the land grew still, the stones holding their positions through the night, patient as the earth from which they came, ready to accept tomorrow's additions to their growing height, their expanding embrace of the valley below. You descend the hill in gathering darkness, leaving the castle to its silent vigil, carrying with you an appreciation for the skill and patience required to transform individual stones into lasting architecture, understanding a little better how power builds itself one careful block at a time, creating permanence from the raw materials of earth and human determination. The fields glow golden as you step into the morning light. Scythes swish softly through the wheat. And somewhere in the distance, a lark calls out its sweet, sleepy song. You've awakened early, before the mist has fully lifted from the valley. The air carries that particular coolness of late autumn, crisp and clean, with just a hint of wood smoke drifting from the village hearths. Your feet sink slightly into the damp earth as you make your way toward the harvest fields, where the last of the grain waits patiently to be gathered. This is the final harvest of the year 1066, a year that has seen so much change sweep across England like autumn wind through barley. But here, in this quiet moment, with golden stalks swaying gently in the morning breeze, the world feels timeless, eternal, as if these same fields have been harvested by countless hands across countless seasons. The villagers are already at work when you arrive. Their voices rise and fall in a gentle rhythm, calling out to one another across the rows. There's something deeply comforting about their familiar sounds, the soft thud of grain bundles hitting the ground, the whispered conversations between neighbors, the occasional laugh that floats like dandelion seeds on the air. You take up a scythe, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of use, warm and familiar in your palms. The blade catches the early sunlight as you begin to work, following the ancient dance that your grandfathers and their grandfathers knew by heart. Swing, step, each motion flowing into the next like water over stones. The wheat falls in neat rows behind you, and with each sweep of the blade, you feel connected to something larger than yourself. This same grain will become bread for the long winter months ahead. These same hands that guide your scythe have worked these fields through Saxon kings and Danish raids, and now under a Norman crown. But the grain doesn't know about kings and crowns. It simply grows, golden and generous, offering itself to whoever tends it with care. As the morning wears on, the sun climbs higher, warming your shoulders through your rough woolen tunic. Sweat beads on your forehead, but it's the good kind of tiredness, the kind that comes from honest work under an open sky. Around you, other harvesters move in their own steady rhythms. Old Godwin, with his bent back and patient smile, gathers bundles with the same care he's shown for 30 harvests. Young Aldred, barely 14, tries to keep pace with the men, his face flushed with effort and pride. The women and children follow behind, gleaning the scattered grains that the scythes have missed. Nothing is wasted in these lean times. Every kernel matters, every stalk has its purpose. You watch as Emma, the miller's wife, teaches her small daughter how to spot the best fallen grain, her voice soft and encouraging. Like this, little one, see how it gleams in the sunlight? There's something deeply peaceful about this work. Your thoughts begin to drift as your hands continue their familiar motions. You think about the Norman lords in their distant castles, making their plans and drawing their maps. But here, surrounded by the whisper of grain and the gentle murmur of your neighbors, their concerns seem very far away indeed. The sun reaches its peak, and the work pauses for the midday meal. Everyone gathers in the shade of an ancient oak tree that stands at the field's edge. Its leaves have just begun to turn, painting themselves in soft golds and russets that mirror the harvested grain. Someone has brought fresh bread and ale, and you settle onto the grass, feeling the coolness of the earth through your clothes. The conversation flows quietly around you. Thomas the blacksmith speaks of shoeing horses for travelers heading south. Mary mentions that her sister in the next village has heard rumors of new taxes being planned. But these worries seem distant and small beneath the vast autumn sky. Instead, talk turns to more immediate things. Whose cow has given the richest milk? Which families will need help getting their grain to the mill? Whether the weather will hold long enough to finish the harvest. As you chew the dark, nutty bread and sip the cool ale, you notice how the light has begun to change. The harsh brightness of midday is softening into something warmer, more golden. Shadows are growing longer, stretching across the stubbled field like sleepy fingers. After the meal, work resumes, but there's a different quality to it now. The initial urgency of the morning has given way to something more meditative, more peaceful. The scythes swing in slower arcs, conversations become more hushed, and even the children gathering grain seem to move with a dreamy sort of purpose. You find yourself working alongside Wulfric, an older man whose face is weathered like old leather, but whose eyes still hold a spark of humor. He's been harvesting these fields since before you were born, and his movements have the easy grace of long practice. Strange times we're living in, he says quietly, his scythe never pausing in its steady rhythm. New lords, new ways of doing things. But look around you, young friend. You pause for a moment and do as he suggests. The field stretches out before you, dotted with bent figures moving slowly through the grain. The sky above is the same blue it's always been, painted with the same lazy white clouds. A hawk circles high overhead, riding the warm air currents with effortless grace. The grain grows the same way, Wolfric continues, his voice barely above a whisper. The seasons turn the same way. The earth gives its gifts the same way. Kings may come and go, but this... He gestures with his scythe toward the field, the workers, the sky. This remains. There's something deeply comforting in his words. You think about all the harvests that have come before this one, stretching back through the mists of time. Roman hands once worked these fields, and Saxon hands, and Danish hands. Now Norman lords may claim ownership of the land, but the work itself, the ancient partnership between human hands and generous earth, that continues unchanged. As the afternoon wears on, you notice how the light continues to soften and deepen. The golden grain seems to glow from within, as if lit by some inner fire. Long shadows stretch across the field, creating pools of coolness where tired workers pause to rest and share a drink of water from the communal jar. Children run between the rows, their laughter bright and clear as birdsong. They're collecting the last scattered grains, but they're also simply being children, chasing each other through the stubble, making games out of the serious work of harvest. Their voices add a note of joy to the peaceful rhythm of the day. You think about how they'll remember this harvest when they're grown. How the golden light and the scent of cut grain and the gentle voices of their neighbors will live on in their memories, woven together into something precious and permanent. Perhaps they'll tell their own children about this day, about the autumn when the Norman king was still new and the world seemed balanced on the edge of change. The work continues, but it's no longer work in any urgent sense. It's become something more like a dance or a prayer, or simply a way of being present in this particular moment. Your muscles have found their rhythm, your breathing has settled into the pace of the scythe, and your mind has grown quiet and still. As the sun begins its gentle descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gold, you realize that this field is nearly finished. The last rows of grain stand ready for cutting, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. There's a sense of completion in the air, mixed with the bittersweet knowledge that this particular harvest is coming to an end. But endings, you reflect, are also beginnings. This grain will feed families through the winter months ahead. Some will be saved for seed, to be planted in the spring when the earth awakens from its rest. The cycle will continue, as it always has, as it always will. The other harvesters seem to sense it too, this approaching end. The work continues, but there's a ceremonial quality to it now. Each swing of the scythe feels deliberate, meaningful. The last bundles are gathered with extra care, as if they're precious beyond measure. As the final stalks fall, a spontaneous cheer rises from the workers. It's not loud or boisterous, more like a gentle expression of satisfaction, of gratitude, of completion. Someone begins to sing an old harvest song, and other voices join in, creating a harmony that seems to rise and blend with the evening air. The song is one you've known since childhood, passed down through generations of harvesters. The words speak of thankfulness for the earth's bounty, of hope for the season ahead, of the continuity that connects all living things. As you add your voice to the chorus, you feel part of something larger than yourself, part of the land, part of the community, part of the endless cycle of seasons and years. As the song fades, the work truly ends. Tools are gathered, bundles are loaded onto carts, and the field that was golden with grain just hours ago now shows only stubble and long shadows. But there's no sadness in this transformation. It feels right, complete, like the final note of a beautiful melody. The harvest feast will be tomorrow night, when the entire village will gather to celebrate the successful completion of the year's most important work. There will be fresh bread made from the new grain, and ale and songs and stories told by the light of the harvest fire. But even now, in this quiet moment of completion, there's a sense of celebration in the air. As you begin the walk back to the village, your scythe balanced on your shoulder, you're joined by your fellow harvesters. The conversation is soft and comfortable, punctuated by contented silences. Everyone is tired, but it's the good kind of tiredness that comes from meaningful work well done. The evening air carries the scent of wood smoke and cooking food from the village ahead. Somewhere, a dog barks once and falls silent. The first stars are beginning to appear in the deepening sky, faint but growing brighter as the daylight fades. You think about the Norman lords in their stone castles, counting their wealth and making their plans. You think about King William, far away in London or Winchester, surrounded by advisors and documents and the complex business of ruling a kingdom. Their concerns seem important, you're sure, but they also seem very distant from this simple truth. The harvest is complete, the grain is gathered, and the earth has once again proven its generous faithfulness. Behind you, the harvested field lies peaceful under the growing darkness. Tomorrow, cattle will be turned out to graze on the stubble, gleaning what nutrition they can from what remains. In a few weeks, the first frost will come, silvering the ground and signaling winter's approach. The field will rest then, gathering strength for another year, another season, another harvest. But those are tomorrow's concerns. Tonight, as you make your way home through the gathering dusk, you carry with you the satisfaction of work completed, of community shared, of ancient rhythms honored and maintained. The harvest is ended, the grain is gathered, and all is well. The last sheaf was gathered, and the village turned toward winter's quiet embrace. Your footsteps echo softly on the dirt path, and overhead, the stars begin their nightly dance across the vast, peaceful sky. The world settles into evening's gentle rhythm, and time moves forward, carrying you softly toward rest and dreams of golden fields beneath an endless, starlit sky. And as you drift now toward sleep, let your mind wander through those golden fields. Let yourself feel the satisfaction of honest work, the warmth of community, the eternal rhythm of seasons turning, like pages in an ancient, peaceful book. Snow dusts the ground as you huddle by the fire. Its warmth wraps around you like a blanket, and outside, the winter wind whispers softly through the bare branches of the village oak. The world has grown quiet now, settled into winter's deep embrace. It's been months since the harvest ended, and the golden fields have given way to a landscape painted in soft whites and gentle grays. Your breath mists in the cold air as you make your way through the village, but ahead, warm light spills from the windows of Godwin's cottage, and you can hear the murmur of voices within. This is the season for gathering, for sharing stories and warmth when the world outside grows still and cold. Tonight, like many nights this winter, the villagers have come together around Godwin's hearth. His cottage is larger than most, with a fire pit in the center and wooden benches arranged in a comfortable circle. The smoke rises lazily through a hole in the roof, carrying with it the scents of burning oak and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. You push open the heavy wooden door, and immediately the warmth embraces you. The fire crackles cheerfully in its pit, casting dancing shadows on the walls and filling the room with golden light. Faces turn toward you with welcoming smiles, and someone makes room on one of the benches, patting the worn wood beside them. The cottage feels like a small world unto itself, separate from the cold and the political changes that swirl beyond its walls. Here, in this circle of flickering light, the concerns of Norman lords and Saxon resistance seem very far away indeed. This is a place for older things, for stories that have been told since before anyone can remember, for wisdom passed down through generations like carefully tended flames. Old Godwin himself sits closest to the fire, his weathered face creased with the lines of many winters. His eyes reflect the firelight as he speaks, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who has seen much and forgotten little. In his hands, he holds a wooden cup filled with warm ale, and steam rises from it like tiny prayers. "Settle in, friends," he says softly, his words barely audible above the fire's gentle crackling. The night is long, and the stories are many. Around the circle, you recognize familiar faces from the village. There's Wulfric, who worked beside you during the harvest, his hands now wrapped around his own cup of ale. Emma the weaver sits with her daughter, both of them working on small pieces of embroidery that catch the firelight. Young Aldred is here too, his eyes bright with the anticipation of stories to come. But there are also newer faces, travelers who have sought shelter from the winter cold, merchants whose journeys have been delayed by snow, even a few Normans who have found their way to this warm circle. The firelight makes everyone equal, you notice. In this flickering glow, differences of birth and language seem to matter less than the simple human need for warmth and companionship. Someone passes you a cup of ale, and you accept it gratefully. The liquid is warm and slightly sweet, flavored with honey and herbs. It spreads warmth through your chest as you sip, and you feel yourself relaxing into the comfortable rhythm of the evening. The conversation flows gently around the circle, touching on small matters first. The weather, the condition of the roads, news from neighboring villages. But gradually, as the ale works its gentle magic and the fire burns lower, the talk turns to deeper things. To stories of the old days, when the world was different and the future seemed more certain. Godwin sets down his cup and leans forward slightly, his eyes taking on a faraway look. I remember, he begins, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the quiet room, when King Edward was still alive, and the world seemed simpler somehow. The Confessor, they called him. Edward the Confessor, who ruled England for more than 20 years before his death, opened the door to all the changes that followed. Godwin speaks of those days with a gentle nostalgia, painting pictures of a time when the king was distant but familiar, when the old ways seemed secure and permanent. He was a good king, Godwin continues, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. Pious, they said, built great churches and lived simply. The land was at peace then, mostly. We had our troubles, of course, but nothing like what came after. Others nod in agreement, adding their own memories of those days. The conversation weaves through the years, touching on harvests and festivals, on marriages and births, on the small, important events that make up the fabric of ordinary life. These are not the stories you'd find in the chronicles of kings and battles, but they're no less real for that. They're the stories that matter to people like you. The stories of how life actually felt in those distant days. But as the fire burns lower and the ale flows more freely, the conversation takes a different turn. Whispers begin to circulate, hushed voices sharing news that has traveled through the winter landscape like wind through bare trees. News of resistance, of Saxon lords who have not accepted Norman rule, of troubles stirring in the north and west. The talk grows more cautious now, eyes glancing toward the strangers in the circle. But the need to share, to understand, to make sense of the changing world is stronger than fear. And so the stories continue, passed from mouth to ear in the ancient way, carrying with them the hopes and fears of a people caught between one world and another. Someone mentions Hereward the Wake, the Saxon nobleman who has been causing trouble for the Normans in the fenlands of East Anglia. His name is spoken with a mixture of admiration and worry. Here is a man who refuses to bow to the new king, who continues to fight for the old ways. But fighting brings consequences, and consequences ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. They say he's gathering men, whispers Thomas the blacksmith, his voice barely audible above the fire's crackling. Saxon thanes who lost their lands, soldiers who won't serve Norman masters, making their stand in the marshes where the Norman horses can't follow. The story spreads around the circle, growing and changing as it passes from person to person. Some admire Hereward's courage, others fear the retribution his actions might bring. The Normans don't take kindly to rebellion, and their response to resistance has been swift and harsh in other parts of the kingdom. But here, in this warm circle, the reality of that conflict seems distant and unreal. The fire continues to burn, casting its gentle light on familiar faces. The ale continues to warm hands and hearts. And the stories continue to flow, carrying within them the endless human need to understand, to connect, to find meaning in the midst of change. An old woman named Edith, who has been silent until now, suddenly speaks up. Her voice is thin but clear, carrying the weight of many years. I've seen 4 kings in my lifetime, she says softly, each one different from the last. Each one bringing changes that seemed earth-shaking at the time. She pauses, sipping her ale thoughtfully. But you know what I've learned? The important things, they stay the same. Babies are still born, crops still grow, people still fall in love and grieve and hope. Kings come and go, but life continues. Her words seem to settle over the circle like a warm blanket. There's wisdom in them, the kind of wisdom that comes from having lived long enough to see the larger patterns, to understand that history is not just the story of great events, but also the story of how ordinary people adapt and endure. The fire burns lower now, and the evening grows later. Some of the travelers have already made their way to beds of straw in the corners of the cottage. Others continue to sit around the dying fire, reluctant to break the spell of warmth and companionship. Godwin reaches for another piece of wood and places it carefully on the flames. The fire flares up briefly, casting new shadows on the walls and bringing fresh warmth to the circle. In that moment of brightened light, you can see all the faces around you clearly, young and old, Saxon and Norman, familiar and strange. All of them united by the simple human need for warmth and connection in the midst of winter's cold. Let me tell you about the great storm, Godwin says suddenly, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a born storyteller. This was, 30 years ago now, maybe more. The winter of the great storm that buried the village for 3 days and 3 nights. And so he begins a new story, one that has nothing to do with kings or battles or political change. It's a story about the village itself, about how the people worked together to survive when the snow piled higher than the rooftops and the wind howled like a living thing. It's a story about neighbors helping neighbors, about sharing what little they had, about the bonds that hold communities together when the world seems intent on tearing them apart. As Godwin speaks, you find yourself sinking deeper into the warmth of the moment. The fire's gentle crackling provides a soothing rhythm beneath his words. The ale has made you drowsy and content. Around you, other faces show the same peaceful drowsiness, the same willingness to be carried away by the story. The tale winds on, touching on moments of fear and moments of joy, on the way the villagers discovered who they could truly count on when times were hard. It's a story about resilience and community, about the way people can find strength in each other when the world seems dark and uncertain. As the story reaches its end, you realize that this is what these winter gatherings are really about. Not just the sharing of news or the passing of time, but the reaffirmation of something deeper. The reminder that whatever changes may come from the outside world, the bonds between neighbors remain strong. The knowledge that people have faced uncertainty before and survived, that they will face it again and survive still. The fire burns lower, casting gentler light on drowsy faces. Some of the villagers begin to make their way to their own homes, wrapping themselves in thick cloaks and stepping out into the cold night. Others settle down on the benches and floors, content to spend the night in the warmth of the cottage. You find yourself growing drowsy, lulled by the fire's gentle warmth and the comfortable silence that has settled over the circle. Outside, the wind continues to whisper through the bare trees, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the soft hoot of an owl calling across the winter landscape. As you settle into a comfortable position, half asleep already, you think about the stories you've heard tonight. Stories of kings and rebels, of great storms and small kindnesses, of the way life continues even when the world seems to be changing too fast to understand. They're all part of the same larger story. You realize the story of how people find ways to keep going, to maintain hope, to hold on to what matters most. The fire burns down to glowing embers, casting just enough light to keep the darkness at bay. The cottage settles into the deep quiet of late night, filled with the gentle sounds of sleeping people and the occasional pop of a log in the fire pit. And as you drift toward sleep yourself, you carry with you the warmth of the evening, the feeling of being part of something larger than yourself, something that has endured through many winters and will endure through many more. The stories become dreams, and the dreams become the gentle rhythm of breathing and heartbeat, carrying you softly through the dark hours toward dawn. The fire's glow dimmed, and the night carried you gently forward, into sleep, into dreams, into the endless rhythm of seasons turning and stories continuing, world without end, like embers glowing softly in the darkness, keeping the cold at bay with their gentle, eternal light. And now, as the fire burns low and the stories fade to whispers, let yourself sink into that same peaceful drowsiness. Let the warmth of community and the comfort of ancient stories carry you gently, gently, into sleep's quiet embrace. The scent of parchment fills the air as you step into the scriptorium, quills scratch softly on vellum. And somewhere in the quiet shadows, a monk hums a gentle psalm under his breath. You've journeyed to the monastery of St. Benes, nestled in a peaceful valley where morning mist clings to ancient stone walls like whispered prayers. The winter has been long, but today brings the first hint of spring's return. A softness in the air, a subtle warming of the pale sunlight that filters through the tall, narrow windows of the scriptorium. This is a place apart from the world of villages and fields, of harvests and hearth fires. Here, time moves differently, measured not by the seasons turning but by the careful progress of quill across parchment, by the slow creation of illuminated letters that bloom like flowers on the pale page. Here, the great work of recording and preserving continues, as it has for centuries, with the patient devotion of men who have given their lives to learning and prayer. Brother Augustine looks up from his writing desk as you enter, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile. He's been expecting you. Word travels quickly through the countryside, even to these quiet walls, and visitors are always welcome, especially those who bring news from the outside world. His habit is the color of brown earth, simple and well-worn, and his hands are stained with the permanent marks of his craft, tiny spots of ink that have accumulated over years of careful writing. "Welcome, friend," he says softly, his voice carrying the particular quietness that comes from a lifetime of speaking in whispers. "Come, see what we have been working on. It is quite remarkable." He gestures to a long table where several monks bend over their work, each focused intently on the parchment before him. But this is not the usual work of copying scripture or recording the lives of saints. These monks are engaged in something new, something that has never been attempted on such a scale before. They are recording England itself, every village, every manor, every field and mill and church, creating a great book that will capture the entire kingdom like a butterfly pressed between pages. Brother Augustine leads you closer to the work, and you can see the careful columns of text taking shape under the scribe's patient quills. Names of places you recognize, villages you've visited, fields you've walked through, but also countless others, stretching across England like a vast web of human habitation. Each entry tells its own small story. Who owns the land, how many people live there, what animals graze in the fields, how much it's all worth in the king's accounting. They call it the Doomsday Book, Brother Augustine explains, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and careful concern. King William has ordered a survey of his entire realm. Every hide of land, every head of cattle, every mill wheel that turns, all of it to be recorded and counted. You lean closer to read over one monk's shoulder, careful not to disturb his work. The script is beautiful, each letter formed with perfect precision, but the content is strangely cold and mathematical. Here is your own village, reduced to numbers and categories. Land for 12 plows. In domain 2 plows and 24 villeins and 8 borders with 10 plows. There are mill and 16 acres of meadow. It's strange to see your home described this way, as if it were a collection of objects rather than a living community of people with their own stories and dreams. The warm cottage where you shared winter evenings around Godwin's fire becomes simply one dwelling. The field where you helped gather the harvest becomes arable land valued at 15 shillings. But Brother Augustine seems to sense your thoughts. It troubles you, he says gently, not really asking, to see your world reduced to marks on parchment. You nod, not quite trusting your voice. There's something both magnificent and melancholy about this great undertaking. The sheer ambition of it takes your breath away. To record an entire kingdom, to capture in writing the vast complexity of human life across England. And yet, in doing so, something essential seems to be lost. The warmth of community becomes cold statistics. The rich texture of daily life becomes abbreviated entries in a royal ledger. I understand, Brother Augustine continues, his eyes returning to the work before him. When I first began helping with this project, I felt much the same. But over the months, as I've watched these pages fill with names and numbers, I've come to see it differently. He picks up a completed page, holding it carefully by the edges. The parchment is smooth and pale, made from the finest sheepskin and prepared with loving care. The ink is deep black, mixed with oak gall and iron, designed to last for centuries. The writing itself is a work of art, each letter perfectly formed, each line straight and true. This is not just accounting, he says softly. This is memory made permanent. Long after we are gone, long after the villages we know have changed beyond recognition, this record will remain. Future generations will be able to look at these pages and see exactly how England appeared in the 20th year of William's reign. You watch as another monk, Brother Oswald, carefully cleans his quill and dips it in fresh ink. His movements are slow and deliberate, each stroke of the pen considered and precise. He's working on an entry for a village in Yorkshire, a place you've never been but that suddenly feels real and specific thanks to his careful notation of its mills and forests, its population and livestock. The work requires not just skill with pen and parchment, but also a deep understanding of the complex web of Norman administration. Brother Augustine explains how the information reaches them. Royal commissioners traveling from manor to manor, asking detailed questions of reeves and bailiffs, recording sworn testimony from local juries. All of this testimony must then be carefully organized, checked against other sources, and finally rendered into the standardized format of the Great Survey. It is the most ambitious undertaking of record-keeping ever attempted, Brother Augustine says, pride evident in his quiet voice. No kingdom in Christendom has ever tried to create such a complete accounting of its resources. As you watch the monks work, you begin to appreciate the magnitude of what they're attempting. This is not just bureaucracy, but a kind of literary miracle. They're creating nothing less than a portrait of England, captured at a specific moment in time with unprecedented detail and precision. Every village like yours, every field like the ones where you harvested grain, every church where you've prayed, all of it being preserved for posterity with loving care. Brother Oswald sets down his quill and flexes his fingers, working out the stiffness that comes from hours of careful writing. My hand grows tired, he admits with a gentle smile. But the work is too important to hurry. Each entry must be perfect, each name spelled correctly. We are creating something that will outlast kingdoms. The afternoon light shifts as clouds pass across the sun, and the scriptorium takes on an even more peaceful quality. The only sounds are the gentle scratching of quills, the occasional rustle of parchment, and the distant chanting of monks at prayer in the chapel nearby. It's a rhythm that seems to exist outside of ordinary time, connected to something eternal and unchanging. Brother Augustine shows you some of the completed sections, and you're amazed by the scope of what they've recorded. Here are the great estates of Norman lords, with their vast holdings carefully catalogued. Here are tiny villages with just a handful of families, their modest resources noted with the same care as the richest manors. Here are the ancient hundreds and shires of Saxon England, now reorganized under Norman administration, but still recognizable in their essential character. Look at this, Brother Augustine says, pointing to a particular entry. This is interesting. A village that appears to have been completely abandoned. Waste, we write. Perhaps destroyed in the fighting after Hastings. Perhaps simply depopulated by plague or famine. But here it is, recorded for all time. Even its emptiness becomes part of the story. There's something profound in that observation. The Doomsday Book isn't just recording what exists, but also what has been lost. The ghosts of abandoned villages, the memory of forests that have been cleared, the traces of an older England that is already beginning to fade. In trying to capture the present moment, the scribes are also preserving echoes of the past. As the day wears on, you find yourself drawn into the quiet rhythm of the scriptorium. The work has a meditative quality that's deeply peaceful. Each carefully formed letter, each precisely measured line, becomes a small act of devotion. These monks aren't just creating a government document. They're crafting a work of art that will endure long after the political purposes that inspired it have been forgotten. Brother Augustine lets you hold one of the completed pages, and you marvel at its weight and texture. The parchment is smooth as silk beneath your fingers, and the ink has a deep richness that seems to glow in the afternoon light. You think about the sheep that gave its skin for this page, the oak trees that provided gall for the ink, the geese whose feathers became quills. Even the physical materials represent a kind of collaboration between human craft and natural bounty. Sometimes, Brother Augustine confides, when I'm working late into the evening by candlelight, I imagine the future readers of these pages. Scholars perhaps, centuries from now, trying to understand what England was like in our time. They'll read about your village, about the fields where you worked, about the people you know. In a way, we're writing your story into permanence. The thought sends a strange shiver through you. Your quiet life, which seems so ordinary and unremarkable, will be preserved in this great book alongside kings and battles and the grand movements of history. Not your individual story, perhaps, but the story of the world you inhabit, the community you're part of, the land that sustains you. As evening approaches, the light in the scriptorium grows softer and more golden. The monks begin to clean their quills and put away their writing materials, their day's work complete. But the pages they've filled remain, covered with their careful script, adding more pieces to the vast puzzle of England that they're assembling letter by letter, word by word. Brother Augustine walks with you toward the monastery's gate, his footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor of the corridor. The work will continue for months yet, he says. Perhaps years. King William is thorough in all things, and he wants his survey to be complete. But when it's finished, he pauses, looking back toward the scriptorium. When it's finished, we'll have created something unprecedented. A mirror of England, held up to catch the light of a single moment in time. Outside, the evening air is soft and mild, carrying the first hints of spring's return. Stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its liquid song. The monastery settles into its evening rhythm of prayer and contemplation, but you know that tomorrow the work will continue. More names will be recorded, more villages catalogued, more of England's vast complexity reduced to careful script on precious parchment. As you make your way back toward your own village, you carry with you a new understanding of the great changes sweeping across England. It's not just that Norman lords have replaced Saxon ones, or that new laws govern the land. Something more fundamental is happening. The very idea of what a kingdom is, what it means to rule and be ruled, is being transformed. The The Doomsday Book represents a new way of seeing, a new relationship between rulers and ruled based on precise knowledge and systematic record-keeping. It's a tool of control, certainly, but also something more. It's an attempt to understand England in all its complexity, to appreciate the intricate web of relationships that bind together the people and the land. The monk's work continued, and you slipped quietly back into the world outside. The night carried you gently forward, past fields and villages that would live forever in their careful script, their patient records preserving this moment like flowers pressed between the pages of time itself. And as you drift toward sleep now, imagine those patient scribes, their quills moving softly across parchment, recording the world with loving care, preserving this moment, this time, these people and places, forever and ever, in the gentle permanence of ink and vellum, like dreams written down, like memories made eternal, drifting softly, softly, into the quiet embrace of sleep. The inn's fire glows as you sit at a worn table. A traveler's voice rises softly above the hum. And outside, the spring rain patters gently against diamond-paned windows, creating a rhythm like distant drums. You've sought shelter in the crossed quays, a sturdy inn that sits where two ancient roads meet, just a day's walk from your village. The building is old, its timber frame darkened by smoke and age, but it radiates warmth and welcome. Rushes cover the floor, mixed with sweet herbs that release their fragrance when crushed underfoot. Tallow candles flicker on the rough wooden tables, casting dancing shadows that seem to tell stories of their own. The common room is filled with the gentle murmur of conversation and the comfortable sounds of evening settling in. Somewhere in the kitchen, you can hear the clatter of bowls and the sizzle of something cooking. The air carries the mingled scents of wood smoke, ale, and the hearty stew that serves as the inn's main offering to hungry travelers. You found a seat near the great fireplace, where logs burn with a steady, cheerful flame. The heat feels good after your walk through the drizzling rain, and you stretch your feet toward the warmth, feeling the dampness slowly leave your clothes. Around you, other travelers sit at their own tables, merchants with mud-splattered boots, pilgrims with their walking staves, craftsmen journeying between towns with their tools wrapped carefully in leather bundles. But it's the man at the table beside you who draws your attention. He's older, perhaps 50 years, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who spends his life on the roads. His clothes are well-made but travel-worn, and his eyes hold the particular alertness of someone who has seen much and forgotten little. When he speaks, his voice carries easily through the room, drawing listeners like a flame draws moths. "I've just come from the north," he's saying to a small group gathered around his table. "From York and the lands beyond. And I tell you, friends, the world is changing faster than a man can follow. Castles rising where there were none before, whole landscapes transformed by Norman will. The innkeeper, a stout woman named Margot, sets a bowl of stew before you along with a chunk of dark bread and a cup of ale. The stew is thick and warming, full of root vegetables and herbs, with tender pieces of meat that fall apart at the touch of your spoon. As you eat, you find yourself listening to the traveler's words, drawn into his account of the wider world beyond your peaceful village. At Warwick," he continues, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller, "they're building a castle the likes of which you've never seen. Stone upon stone, rising from the earth like a mountain made by human hands. They say it will take years to complete, but already its shadow falls across half the town." Someone asks about the workers, and the traveler nods thoughtfully. "Hundreds of them. Stonemasons brought from Normandy, carpenters from as far as Flanders. Local men too, of course, anyone with strong hands and a willing back. The pay is good, they say, but the work is hard. Harder than anything they've known before. You think about the simple wooden buildings of your own village, the modest church with its stone walls and timber roof. The idea of a castle built entirely of stone seems almost magical, like something from a legend rather than the real world. But the traveler speaks of it matter-of-factly, as just another change in a world that seems to be remaking itself with each passing season. And at Nottingham, he goes on, warming to his theme, they've thrown up a castle on the great rock that overlooks the town. You can see it from miles away, like a crown sitting on the hill's head. The townsfolk say it changes everything. The way the light falls, the way the wind blows, even the way people speak to each other in the streets below. There's something in his voice when he talks about these new castles. Not quite fear, but certainly unease. These are structures designed to dominate, to remind everyone within sight that power has shifted and that the new order is here to stay. They're not just buildings, but statements written in stone across the English landscape. A younger man at another table leans forward. But surely the people welcome protection? He asks. These castles, they offer safety from bandits and raiders, do they not? The traveler considers this, swirling the ale in his cup. Perhaps, he says slowly. Perhaps they do. But protection for whom? And from what? I've seen villages that once governed themselves now paying taxes to Norman lords they've never met. I've seen ancient boundaries redrawn to suit foreign convenience. Protection, yes, but at what cost? The conversation continues, flowing like a river around rocks of discussion and debate. Other travelers add their own observations, their own stories of change and adaptation. A merchant speaks of new regulations governing trade, of officials who must be satisfied before goods can move freely along the roads. A craftsman tells of guilds being reorganized according to Norman custom, of old ways of working being replaced by new methods and new masters. But it's not all tales of upheaval and uncertainty. The traveler also speaks of wonders, of the great cathedral being built at Winchester, where skilled craftsmen from across Europe work together to create something magnificent, of new mills and bridges, of roads being improved and harbors expanded. Norman rule brings disruption, certainly, but also energy and ambition on a scale that Saxon England rarely knew. At Durham, the traveler says, his voice dropping to a more reverent tone, they're building a cathedral that will dwarf anything the world has seen. The plans alone took months to draw, brought from master builders in Normandy. When it's finished, they say, it will stand for 1,000 years. The image captures your imagination. A building designed to last a millennium, its stones carefully fitted to resist the ravages of time and weather. It speaks to a kind of confidence, a belief in the permanence of the new order. That's both impressive and slightly overwhelming. As the evening progresses, more travelers share their stories. Each tale adds another piece to the complex picture of England under Norman rule. Here, a village that has prospered under its new lord, who brought improved farming techniques and fair justice. There, a community struggling to adapt to foreign customs and unfamiliar demands. The country seems to be a patchwork of experiences, some bright and some dark, all woven together into a fabric that's still taking shape. The fire burns lower as the night deepens, and the conversation becomes more intimate, more reflective. The traveler speaks now not just of grand projects and political changes, but of smaller, more personal observations. The way people dress differently in different regions, as Norman fashions slowly spread through the population. The way language itself is changing, as Norman French words creep into everyday English speech. In the markets, he says softly, you hear it happening. A Saxon merchant trying to bargain with a Norman customer, each struggling with the other's tongue. But somehow they manage, and in the managing, something new is born. Words borrowed and lent, meanings shifted and shared. There's something hopeful in this observation, you think. Despite all the upheaval and uncertainty, people are finding ways to communicate, to trade, to live together. The political conquest may have been swift and violent, but the slower work of cultural adaptation is proving more collaborative, more creative. The innkeeper brings around another round of ale, and the conversation turns to the roads themselves. The ancient trackways that connect village to village, town to town, carrying news and goods and ideas across the length and breadth of England. The traveler knows these roads like a sailor knows sea currents, understanding their moods and dangers, their shortcuts and safe harbors. The roads are changing too, he observes. Norman efficiency extends to transportation. They're widening the old tracks, improving drainage, building new bridges where fords used to serve. A man can travel farther in a day now than his father could, and arrive less weary for the journey. You think about your own occasional travels, the muddy tracks and uncertain paths that connected your village to the wider world. The idea of improved roads appeals to you. Easier journeys, safer passages, the possibility of seeing more of this changing land with your own eyes. But the traveler also speaks of the challenges these improvements bring. Better roads mean more traffic, he explains. More officials checking papers, more tolls to be paid, more rules to be followed. The freedom of the road, it's not what it once was. As the night grows later, the common room gradually empties. Some travelers make their way upstairs to the inn's sleeping chambers, while others settle down on benches near the fire, wrapped in their traveling cloaks. The conversation becomes quieter, more drowsy, like a river slowing as it approaches the sea. The traveler yawns and stretches, his day's storytelling nearly done. But he has one more tale to share, a gentler one that seems designed to ease his listeners towards sleep. It's about a village he visited in the Welsh borderlands, a place where Saxon and Norman, Welsh and English, all seemed to live together in unexpected harmony. There was a market day, he says, his voice growing softer, and I watched as people from all these different worlds came together to trade and talk. Children playing games that mixed traditions from 3 different peoples. Women sharing recipes that had traveled hundreds of miles. Men working together to repair a bridge, each contributing skills learned in different places. The image is peaceful, reassuring. It suggests that beneath all the political turmoil and cultural upheaval, the basic human needs for connection and cooperation remain strong. People will find ways to build bridges, both literal and metaphorical, across the divisions that history has created. That's what gives me hope, the traveler concludes, his eyes heavy with sleep. Not the great castles or the grand cathedrals, impressive as they are, but the small moments when people choose to understand rather than fear, to build rather than destroy. The future of England, it's being written in 1,000 small encounters like that, one conversation at a time. The fire has burned down to glowing embers now, casting a gentle red light that seems to wrap the room in warmth and peace. The rain outside has stopped, and through the windows, you can see stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky. The inn settles into the deep quiet of late night, filled with the soft sounds of sleeping travelers and the occasional creak of old timbers. As you prepare to find your own rest for the night, you carry with you the traveler's stories. Visions of a land in transformation, of ancient ways giving way to new possibilities, of people adapting and enduring and finding unexpected connections across the boundaries of culture and conquest. The path ahead may be uncertain, but it's not without hope, not without the possibility of something beautiful emerging from all this change. The traveler's voice faded, and the road called you onward, through dreams of stone castles and cathedral spires, of markets where different worlds meet and mingle, of the endless human journey toward understanding and peace. The night embraced you gently, carrying you forward on paths both ancient and new, toward rest and renewal and the promise of tomorrow's discoveries. And now, as the inn grows quiet and the fire burns low, let yourself drift along those ancient roads, past villages sleeping under starlight, past fields where morning will bring new growth. Let the traveler's tales carry you softly, softly, into the peaceful country of sleep, where all roads lead to rest, and all journeys end in dreams. The air feels fresh and alive as you step into the spring morning. Blossoms dust the ground like snow, and somewhere in the apple orchard, a thrush calls out its liquid song of renewal and hope. Spring has come at last to your village, painting the world in soft greens and gentle colors. The long winter months have passed like a dream, leaving behind only memories of firelit evenings and whispered stories. Now the earth stirs with new life, and everywhere you look, there are signs of awakening. Buds swelling on the hawthorn hedges, lambs bleating in the meadows, the first brave daffodils pushing through the dark soil like golden promises. You walk slowly through the village lanes, breathing in the sweet air that carries the scent of apple blossoms and fresh grass. The changes that winter brought seem softer now, gentler somehow in the forgiving light of spring. The Norman manor house that rose on the hill no longer looks quite so foreign. Ivy has begun to climb its walls, and swallows have built their nests under its eaves, making it part of the landscape. In the village square, people move with lighter steps than they have in months. Old Godwin tends his garden, setting out seedlings with the careful attention of someone who has done this dance with the seasons for 40 years. Emma the weaver hangs her washing on the line, bright cloth fluttering like prayer flags in the gentle breeze. Children play between the houses, their laughter bright as water over stones. There's something different about the village now, a sense of acceptance, perhaps, or simply the natural human ability to adapt and endure. The Norman lord who arrived last autumn is no longer a stranger, but simply part of the village's story. His steward speaks a mixture of French and English that grows more comprehensible each day. The new laws and customs that seemed so foreign in winter have begun to feel like familiar routines. Young Aldred passes by, leading a cart loaded with seed grain toward the fields. He nods and smiles, his face bright with the prospect of another planting season. Beside him walks one of the Norman soldiers, but they're talking together easily, sharing some joke about the weather or the work ahead. It strikes you how natural they look together, how quickly the boundaries between Saxon and Norman have begun to blur in the daily rhythm of village life. The fields themselves tell the story of this gentle accommodation. Saxon farmers work alongside Norman overseers, sharing knowledge that flows both ways. The newcomers bring techniques learned in the rich soils of Normandy, while the villagers offer wisdom accumulated over generations of working this particular earth. Together, they're creating something new, not purely Saxon or Norman, but English in a way that didn't exist before. As you watch the planting begin, you think about seeds and growth, about how change comes not always as conquest, but sometimes as quiet transformation. The grain that will grow here will feed Saxon and Norman alike. The harvest songs that will echo across these fields will blend melodies from both traditions. The children who will play among the growing stalks will speak words borrowed from both languages. The world bloomed quietly, and time carried you gently to its close. Spring had come to England, bringing with it the eternal promise of renewal, of growth, of hope taking root in soil made rich by the mingled sorrows and joys of all who had walked this land before. The grass is cool beneath you as you gaze up at the endless sky. Stars twinkle like distant candles, and the night air carries the sweet scent of honeysuckle and the gentle sound of a stream finding its way to the sea. You've climbed the hill above your village, seeking the quiet that comes only in the deep hours of night when the world settles into sleep. Below you, scattered windows glow with warm lamplight, each one marking a home where families rest after the day's work. Saxon and Norman, old villagers and new arrivals, all united now in the simple human need for rest and shelter and peace. The stars will slowly overhead in their ancient dance, the same patterns that have guided travelers and dreamers since time began. You think about all the people who have lain on this hill before you, looking up at these same stars. Saxon farmers and Roman soldiers, Danish raiders and Celtic priests, each seeking their own understanding of their place in the vast scheme of things. Tonight, as you rest here in the soft grass, England feels different than it did that autumn day when news of Hastings first reached your village. The sharp edges of change have been worn smooth by time and weather, by the daily work of living and the slow alchemy of human adaptation. What seemed like ending has revealed itself as beginning. What felt like loss has transformed into something richer, more complex. The Norman conquest, you realize, was not just a single event but the start of a longer story. A story still being written in the daily choices of ordinary people choosing understanding over fear, cooperation over conflict. In the fields below, Saxon and Norman children will grow up together, will learn each other's songs, will someday marry and create families that bridge the old divisions. You think about King William in his palace, about the great lords planning their great plans, about the chroniclers who will write the official histories. But their stories, important as they are only part of the truth. The real history of England is being written here, in villages like yours, by people whose names will never appear in any chronicle, but whose quiet choices shape the future in ways no king can fully control. The stars seem to whisper their own stories as they drift across the sky. Tales of other lands, other times, other peoples who face their own moments of change and uncertainty. They remind you that you are part of something larger than your own brief life, part of the great human story that stretches back to the beginning of time and forward to whatever future awaits. As the night deepens and your eyes grow heavy, you feel a profound sense of peace settling over you like a soft blanket. The year 1066 has become history now, but its legacy lives on in the transformed land spread out below you. England has been reborn, not as Norman or Saxon, but as something new, something that will continue to grow and change in ways no one can predict. The stars seemed to whisper goodnight, and your eyes grew heavy. You are part of this story, part of this land, part of the endless human journey toward understanding and hope. The night embraces you gently, carrying you softly towards sleep and dreams of all the tomorrows yet to come. As the stars fade softly into the velvet sky, our journey through the quiet villages of 1066 England draws to a gentle close. You've wandered through fields dusted with morning dew, sat by crackling hearths, and listened to the murmurs of a land settling under a new king's rule. William's crown now rests heavy, but in the humble homes, life flows on, steady, like a river carving its path through time. The scent of wood smoke lingers in your memory, the rustle of leaves a faint lullaby. Let your mind drift now, as if carried by a soft breeze across those ancient hills. You don't need to hold on to the names or dates. They're already slipping away, like grains of sand through your fingers. Tonight, we've traveled far, through a world of straw roofs and stone churches, where hope and change wove together in the hearts of simple folk. And now it's time to rest. Picture yourself lying on a cool meadow, the earth cradling you, the stars above whispering good night. Each breath you take is slower, deeper, as your body sinks into the warmth of your bed. The stories of England's past fade into a soft hum, a comforting echo that carries you towards sleep. Let your thoughts float, weightless, like a leaf on a stream, drifting wherever dreams may lead. Thank you for sharing this quiet journey, my friend. If you've enjoyed this gentle tale, perhaps we'll meet again under another starry sky. For now, close your eyes, let the world grow still, and sleep deeply, peacefully as history whispers on.